Chapter 399. I'm sure of it. Karagoro confidently pointed at the mountain in front of him. These Simonians chased after the tribes of Potentia and came here. I don't know where they got the news, but they actually wanted to ambush us here. They didn't know that my men had already seen their every move. Karagoro, your team has made a great contribution today. I'll remember it. Alexis patted the horse that was a little restless. Although our army has never trained in Potentia, I believe that you all have not forgotten the terrain here, right, Lazare? You've brought us to the southern mountains of Potentia several times in civilian clothes. How could I forget? Our military law has strict rules that all officers of the Legion must memorize the terrain of the area in their heads. Lysam pointed at his own head. Sir Devers is a great man. Alexis sighed. It was precisely this military law that the Devers had formulated that was strictly enforced by the officers and soldiers, so that the army could be prepared in times of war. He then remembered the advice of the Devers when he was appointed as the commander of Legio III. He said seriously, "Now is the time to test you. At the same time, let us see how powerful the Simonians are." Gurney saw the flags waving in the opposite mountain. Obviously, the enemy was attacking Abrini's team at the same time. At this moment, he didn't have the mood to worry about his good friend. He led his more than 1,000 soldiers down the mountain. Other than the colorful crown on his helmet, his equipment was no different from the other soldiers. He wore a golden copper helmet, a loose red short-sleeved robe that only reached his knees, and a leather belt tied around his waist. He held a spear in his right hand and 4 or 5 javelins in his left. Other than that, there was nothing else, because he had considered beforehand that they were going to ambush the Dionysian army. Gurney brought only lightly armed soldiers. They saw the steep hillside as flat ground, shuttling between rocks and trees. They were as agile as monkeys, stepping on thorns and gravel barefoot without feeling any pain. Soon, they approached the Dionysian army who were climbing up. Compared to the speed at which the Samni went down the mountain, the speed at which the Dionysians went up the mountain was slower. They were a mix of light infantry, light armor soldiers, and heavy infantry. They pulled out a loose arc-shaped battle line and tried to surround this side of the forest so that the Samni could not escape. However, they did not expect the Samni to come so quickly. As the temporary commander of this mixed army, Legio III's 2nd Brigade, Kelsima, didn't panic at all. If it was a few years ago, when Lucania Municipality hadn't merged with the Dionynia Alliance, Kelsima would definitely lead his tribe's warriors to fight. But now, he was already a qualified commander of the Legion of Dionysia. Archers ready. Heavy infantry, protect them. As Kelsima gave the order, the heavy infantry of the Legion had already leaned against the trees and rocks, erecting long arc-shaped shields to protect themselves and the archers. The light armor soldiers and javelin throwers retreated even further. Unless the Simonians broke through the heavy infantry's line of defense, it would be difficult for them to attack them. Under the protection of the long shields, the archers calmly drew their bows and aimed at the Samnian people who were rushing towards them. The Samnian people's formation was even more loose. Coupled with the lush trees that covered the mountains and plains, the effect of a team's shooting would be minimal. Therefore, a more accurate one-on-one shot was needed. Although the Simonians were 100 meters away from the heavy infantry, the javelins they threw while running had strong kinetic energy. In an instant, the javelins flew in front of the heavy infantry. Bang! 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 More than half of the javelins hit the long shields accurately. The heavy infantry looked at the sharp tips of the javelins and could not help but feel a little frightened. They were heavy javelins. The arrows of the Dionysia archers also shot out. Without any protection, the Simonians quickly crawled under the rocks or hid behind the tree trunks to avoid the arrows. For a moment, spears and arrows were flying in the forest. The Dionysian soldiers had a stronger defense, and the archers had a more stable platform to shoot arrows from. The samurai relied on their agile movements and the powerful penetrative power of their javelins to resist the Dionysian soldiers. Even though they had no defense and their casualties were gradually increasing, it did not weaken their fighting spirit. Relying on the cover of the trees, Gurney and his subordinates had already approached within 40 meters of the Dionysians. When he saw that the javelins he had thrown with all his might had caused the shields of the Dionysian heavy infantry to shake a few times and the soldiers to almost fall, he weighed the last javelin in his hand and thought to himself, just a little closer, I can definitely kill one more. He thought confidently and suddenly got out of the tree where he was hiding. He nimbly circled around the snake-shaped route and continued to rush down. The entire Simonians' line of skirmishers was about 30 meters away from the enemy. Gurney leaned against a big tree and dodged the enemy's arrows like the other soldiers. When the archers took out their arrows, he emerged again and was ready to throw the javelin in his hand at the heavy infantry in front of him. At this time, he saw a shocking scene. The heavy infantry of Dionia suddenly threw away the long shields in their hands and made a throwing motion. Not good javelins. Gurney's eyes suddenly widened. The heavy infantry on the opposite side actually threw javelins. Thousands of javelins mixed with arrows flew out, catching the Samoyed soldiers off guard. Many Samoyed soldiers who did not have time to hide were immediately pierced by the javelins, and screams could be heard everywhere. Gurney did not have time to make a judgment. When the heavy infantry of Dionia threw the javelin throwers 10 meters behind them also rushed up and threw the javelins in their hands again. The light-armored soldiers followed closely behind them. While the Simonians were dodging the javelins, they crossed the line of defense of the heavy infantry and quickly approached the enemy. Retreat! Retreat quickly! Gurney knew that he could no longer show off at this moment. The strange tactical combination of the Dionia soldiers had disrupted their attack rhythm. If they continued to delay, they might not be able to leave. Gurney quickly retreated while gesturing. The bugler who had been following behind him immediately blew the horn. However, the speed of the light-armored soldiers of Delnia was not slow either. As Lucanians, they were also good at climbing mountains. Moreover, they were also wearing light armor and had rested for a while. Therefore, when the Simonians hesitated for a moment, they were caught up by the light-armored soldiers, not to mention the injured soldiers. On the hillside filled with trees and rocks, it was a battle of spears against leather shields and short swords. It was not an easy task for the samurai warriors to widen the distance between them and unleash the power of their long weapons. Once the Dionic light armor soldiers got close to them, the samurai warriors would be in danger. On the mountain ridge, one was running while the other was chasing. It was common to see one-on-one fights with spears and swords. When Gurney crossed the mountain ridge and escaped from the pursuit of the Dionia soldiers, he found that there were only about 500 people following him. He had lost almost half of his soldiers. By the time he met up with Abrini's troops, his good brother had already been hit by a javelin and was on the verge of death. Out of the 1,000 soldiers he led, only about 300 were left. Originally, he wanted to ambush the Dionysian army, but he did not expect to be ambushed by the Dionia soldiers. Furious and depressed, Gurney led his defeated soldiers and quickly retreated to the north without any rest. These are the Simonians. Alexis looked at the corpses on the ground carefully. She even touched the thick calluses on the soles of their bare feet. They're very hard, like they're wearing a pair of shoes. Shima, you just fought with the Simonians. Tell me how it feels to fight them. Shima thought for a moment and said, Commander, the Simonians are very brave. They're all light infantry, but they dared to rush less than 30 meters away from us and throw javelins. Their formation is very loose, and there's a lot of time between them. This reduces the accuracy of our light infantry's long-range attack. This tactic is very similar to our light infantry's tactics. Also, look, Shima grabbed a Simonian javelin and passed it to Alexis. Alexis weighed the javelin in her hand, then brought the tip of the javelin closer to her eyes for a closer look. Her expression became serious. "It's a javelin with a heavier spearhead. It's about the same weight as our javelins. Is that why nearly 100 of your men were injured?" Kelsima nodded and said seriously, "Their javelin-throwing skills aren't any worse than Epthenis's light shield-bearers. As long as their shields are hit head-on, they can often pierce through them. That's how our brothers were injured." Alexis lowered her head and looked at the shields that were pierced by a few javelins. She said, "I heard from the soldiers that the Simonians run very fast in the forest. You couldn't catch up with them no matter how hard you tried. That's why they escape." Shima retorted, unconvinced. "The Simonians run very fast, but we Lucanians are also good at climbing the forest. If we weren't wearing heavier armor, we would have caught up with them long ago. I heard from the people of Potentia that although the Simonians also have heavy infantry who wear breastplates, most of them are light infantry who throw javelins." Alexis looked at the rolling mountains in front of her and felt a little worried. "Order the army to speed up and set up camp in the valley upstream of Basento, which is the closest to us." Less than a mile north of Potentia city, in a former Potentia village, Gurney stood in front of the leader of the Hilpini tribe, Villani, with his head lowered. Chapter 400. His question made Gurney raise his head, and the other leaders in the wooden house also became interested. Dionia. At this moment, when Gurney heard this name, hatred rose in his heart. He tried to recall the scene at that time. Their soldiers are mostly heavy infantry, but their heavy infantry is different from the Greek heavy infantry we have seen before. Their helmets are very similar to ours, and they are not holding round copper shields, but long shields similar to ours. Ah? The Samanese leaders were surprised. What we have to pay special attention to is that their heavy infantry is also like our heavy infantry. They can throw javelins. Gurney recalled the painful scene. However, the leaders were in an uproar. "When did the Greeks start to learn our tactics? The people of Dionia have never come into contact with us. How could they learn our tactics?" While the leaders were discussing, Veroni asked with concern, "Then, does the heavy infantry of Dionia have the same equipment as our heavy infantry?" "It's not the same. Their chest armor is tighter, covering their arms, chest, back, crotch, and thighs. They also have shin armor on their calves. That means we will be at a disadvantage in a face-to-face javelin throw," Lucine, the leader of the Kappas, said worriedly. "We will be fine with long shields. No matter how thick the armor is, it will be injured by a javelin throw. On the contrary, the heavy infantry of Dionia is too heavily armed, and it is not good for moving in the mountains." Lescock, the leader of Beneventum, did not care too much about this. Leader Lescock is right. Quinduk, who was responsible for leading the Cautini warriors to participate in the battle, said confidently, "We have fought with the Greeks of Campania many times. Their heavy infantry is cumbersome in the mountains, and it is difficult for them to walk, so they can't catch up with us at all. Instead, they are not agile enough to avoid the javelins we throw from behind them, and we will not easily fight with the Greeks on the plains." Leader Quinduk is talking about our decades of experience in dealing with the Greek heavy infantry. The mountains are the world of the Samanese. Since the people of Dionia dare to come in, we will make it impossible for them to go out. Lucine said loudly to encourage. "That's right. Kill the people of Dionia. Let them know the power of the Samani." Many leaders echoed. "But Dionia doesn't only have heavy infantry." Gurney had to remind the overconfident leaders. They also have archers, javelin throwers without armor or shields, and light infantry with small shields and short swords. They move very fast in the mountains. I think they might be Lucanians, and what should attract our attention is that the heavy infantry, archers, javelin throwers, and light infantry in the Dionysian army, they cooperate very well with each other. Obviously, they have been trained for a long time. They are obviously different from the citizen soldiers of the Greek city-states in Campania. After Gurney finished speaking, the leaders fell into deep thought. At this moment, Valan said in a low voice, "The Dionia have arrived at Potentia in such a short time, so this troop must not be the main force of Turii. There must not be too many of them. Since they have the guts to come, we will let them have a taste of the power of the Samoyed warriors." His words lifted the spirits of the leaders. "Quinduk, you will lead 7,000 Kautini warriors to guard the camp. The other leaders will lead all your warriors and attack the attacking Dionia with me." "Great leader, you mean all the Hilpini warriors?" Leskok asked in surprise. "Yes, 25,000 Hilpini warriors," Valan said clearly. "Isn't that too many?" "I think it's too little. If Torek hadn't brought his 18,000 Pentine warriors to attack Poseidonia, I would have asked his Pentine army to come with us." Valan said with a face full of pride, "This time, I will eat this Dionia army that dares to enter Potentia alone." "What if the Lucanians in Potentia suddenly come out?" Lucani asked with a little worry. "I was worried that they would not dare to come out." Quinduk looked at Valan and said with a smile. Valan nodded and said, "There are no more than 10,000 warriors in Potentia. If they dare to come out, Quinduk, don't be in a hurry to defeat them. Instead, keep them busy. I will lead the army back as soon as possible and attack from the front and back with you to annihilate them." "Understood." Quinduk's eyes flashed with a cold light. "Felicius, you're finally back." Devers came out of the living room happily and held Felicius' hands. He said with a smile, "I heard that you did a good job in Cosenza. The leaders of the Britti tribe and the herdsmen line up in front of your official residence every day, wanting to see you. Haha, after being the governor for more than a year, you can't bear to let go of it, can you?" "Sir, don't make fun of me. Next time, no matter how much you try to persuade me, I will not go to the Britti region to be the governor." Felicius smiled bitterly and shook his head. "The people there do not believe in judges at all. No matter how big the dispute is, they come to me, the governor. If it were not for the full assistance of Hesidus, the former leader of the Xylan tribe, I don't think I could have stayed in Cosenza for more than 3 months. But you have been in Cosenza for more than a year, and the Senate Public Administration Committee has investigated you several times. They all think that you have done a good job in Cosenza. I believe that it will be very easy for you to be the governor of other cities." Devers smiled and praised him. "Come, let's go in and talk." Both parties sat down and the slaves served the syrup. Felicius was not in the mood to drink it. He immediately said to Devers, "Sir, this time you proposed me to be the commander of the southern part of Dionia, commanding the 4th and 5th legions. But to be the commander-in-chief of the entire Southern Alliance coalition army, I think it will be too difficult. Will big cities like Crotone and Lygium be willing to listen to my command?" After listening, Devers advised him seriously, "Felicius, this task is indeed a little troublesome. But even if it is troublesome, you have to do your best and do it well. You have to know that although the agreement of the Southern Alliance states that all cities, big or small, are to be treated equally, but all the cities understand that in reality, Dionia is the leader of this alliance. If we are not the commander-in-chief of this alliance, if we are not responsible for the organization and command, which city would dare to be the leader? So don't worry, boldly manage and command the alliance. Also, I have written letters to the councils of the cities like Crotone and Lygium, asking for their active cooperation. The messengers have already been sent. At the same time, the Senate has also arranged for Sir Ansitanos to be your diplomatic liaison officer, responsible for coordinating with the various cities." "That's great." Felicius' expression relaxed a lot, but he continued, "Sir, you asked us to set up defenses in Conconia and Trine, but now that Syracuse has not declared war, will Conconia and Trine allow us to set up camps on their land in advance? Once Syracuse declares war, their army will quickly land at Locri, but our alliance comes from various cities, and it will take a lot of time just to gather them together, not to mention the fact that we have to rush to Conconia and Trine to set up camps. What if Syracuse's army breaks through Conconia before the camps are built? That is indeed a problem. After the war starts, there will be many unexpected factors, and no one can make accurate predictions. Devers tapped his fingers on the armrest and pondered for a long time. Finally, he said, "Do your best to follow the original plan. If things don't work out, do your best to preserve our strength. Don't fight blindly. But there is a bottom line that you must keep in mind." Devers tapped his fingers on the table and said firmly, "Defend Canopetia and Asprustum, and help Crotone defend Ciudad Crotone. As long as this line of defense is not lost, we can keep the enemy outside our territory, accumulate our strength, and wait for a counterattack." "All right, sir. I will defend the territory in the south and wait for your return." Felicius promised, but he asked, "What if Syracuse's fleet bypasses Crotone and lands behind us?" Felicius' overcautious attitude disappointed Devers. He said impatiently, "It's not that easy to land tens of thousands of soldiers on our land. Don't we have 2 new legions? Also, this is not something you should be concerned about. It's Sexlian's business. Sexlian, once the war between Dionia and Syracuse breaks out, what preparations does your navy have?" Devers asked with a serious expression. Chapter 401. "But," Siclian rubbed his nose, "since you are about to take away the first legion that has been training with us for months, I will need to retrain the soldiers of the new legion. However, this won't take too much time, and I believe that I will soon be able to lead this brand new fleet south to seek out the Syracuse navy for a decisive battle. I believe that the Syracuse navy will definitely be shocked." Siclian appeared to be in high spirits, clearly filled with confidence towards the new strategy. The Devers lightly shook their heads in their hearts, reminding him earnestly, "Siclian, even if you win against the Syracuse navy in some part of the Ionian Sea, it is inevitable that our ships will be damaged. The soldiers who have fallen into the water need to be rescued, the damaged ships need to be repaired, and the captured ships need to be towed back. You have so many things to take care of, but you must know that Syracuse has more than one fleet. What if," the Devers emphasized, "while you are busy, enemy reinforcements appear?" The Devers saw that Siclian was in a hurry to explain, so they reached out to stop him. "Even if enemy reinforcements don't appear, it won't be easy for you to take care of the aftermath. Furthermore, we only have one fleet, and I hope that it will only grow stronger and not weaker. That is why I suggest that you arrange for the first naval battle to be." After listening to the Devers' detailed plan, Siclian was completely convinced. "I understand, my lord. I will carry out your plan. However, there is something I need your help with right now, or else it will affect the Navy's preparations for war." "What is it?" "With the arrival of the warships from the other alliances, our dry docks won't be enough." This was a problem. The Devers thought for a moment before saying, "I will have Lord Cunigurata speed up the construction of more dry docks on both sides of the Crati River from Turii City to the estuary. We will establish a naval base to satisfy your needs." The Legio III of Dionia arrived at the Pigno Valley. The Pigno River was a tributary of the Bacento River, the largest river that flowed through Potentia. Although it was only a small river, it was enough to meet the water needs of an entire legion. Furthermore, the soil in the valley was soft, lush with water plants, and steep and unclimbable mountains on both sides. It was a good place to set up camp. Therefore, Alexis chose to build a camp in the open part of the valley. All the soldiers unloaded their gear and started to dig the trench. The leader of the reconnaissance team, Krigaru, rushed over and reported, "Commander, we found the Samani coming from 5 miles to the north. There are about 20,000 of them." More than 20,000 people. Alexis was shocked. The Samani had come so quickly, and in such a large number, it was beyond his expectations. From this, he could feel the ferocity of the Samani, and their desire for revenge was very strong. Alexis looked regretfully at the unfinished trench in front of him. If he had 2 or 3 more hours, the Legio III would be able to build a rough camp, and then they would have the strength to fight against the Samni. Retreat! He decisively gave the order. What? The herald thought he had heard wrong. Retreat now! Alexis shouted again. After the bugle sounded, Ritoru arrived a moment later. Commander, why are we retreating when we just arrived at the camp? Could it be that Si Hao Bing misheard the order? Ritoru asked in a questioning tone. He didn't. Over 20,000 Samni warriors are charging at us. We can't go head-to-head with the Samni, who outnumber us twice as many when we haven't set up camp, and our brothers are extremely exhausted. We can only retreat first and look for an opportunity later. Alexis explained a little more to show respect to the leader of the 1st Brigade. Retreating before the battle? This is too bad for morale. The soldiers and the people of Dionia will think we are cowards. We won't be able to hold our heads up high in front of the soldiers of the other legions. Ritoru retorted. Besides, I think that even if it's only 9,000 against 20,000, our legion can still resist the enemy's attack and defeat them. The Devers once said that the Samni are fierce. Even if we can defeat them, we will cripple the Legio III. Do you think we still want to participate in future battles? More importantly, this will affect the Devers' plan. Alexis held back his anger and explained a little more. I believe that repelling the enemy's attack and building a camp here is what Lord Daphus wants. Ritoru retorted without backing down. Carry out the order. Alexis decided not to argue with him. The military law of Dionia emphasized military discipline. During wartime, subordinates had to obey their superiors. Ritoru stared at Alexis angrily, but in the end, he chose to obey. This meant that Ritoru had surpassed the level of a tribal warrior and was now a qualified Dionia general. He reluctantly saluted. When he turned around, he deliberately said in a loud voice, "If Lord Hieronymus is still the commander of the Legion, he will never retreat." Alexis pretended not to hear his angry words. Now he had to think about how to retreat safely. The city of Potentia was situated on the upper reaches of the Bacento River. The land there was relatively flat, but the terrain was higher and could be considered a small plateau. The city was built on a large, but relatively gentle, hillside. Potentia had spent decades building a large city out of stone. Now, Pwamit and the tribal leaders were anxiously observing the movements of the Samni outside the city every day. Great leader, look! The Samni army is heading south. Shahadat pointed at the dust-filled, noisy place outside the city and said loudly. Pwamit's heart skipped a beat and he shouted excitedly, "Tribesmen, Dionia's reinforcements must have arrived." This sentence excited the leaders and warriors. The powerful Dionia had come to their rescue. This good news relieved them of the worries they had for the past few days. "Should we send reinforcements?" one of the leaders asked excitedly. "No." Pwamit refused without hesitation. He said cautiously, "The only thing we can do now is to defend this city with all our might and wait for Dionia's reinforcements to arrive." When the Samni arrived at the Pinio River Valley, all they saw was an unfinished, circular trench that was several miles long. The Dionia are as cowardly as rabbits. They actually ran away. Leskuk panted heavily, and stabbed the spear in his hand into the ground with a look of regret. "Father, most of the Dionia soldiers are heavy infantry. They shouldn't have run far. We should use this opportunity to chase after them and defeat them." Journey, who was eager for revenge, said urgently to Hilpini. Of course, Villani wasn't willing to come here for nothing. He immediately ordered his troops to continue the pursuit. The rash Samni were quickly ambushed by Legion III's light infantry. After paying the price of a few hundred casualties, they still couldn't capture the Lucarian light infantry, who were better equipped and better at climbing mountains. As angry as Villani was, he had no choice but to be cautious. As such, Legion 3 was finally able to shake off the Samani's pursuit. At dusk, they entered a military camp on the border between the Grimentum and Potentia. After setting off from the Grimentum yesterday, they only showed their faces in the Grimentum for a short while. Today, they were forced to return to the Grimentum. Alexis and the soldiers of the 3rd Legion were also a little depressed. Poseidonia, a coastal city not far north of Elia, not the city of Poseidon on the Aegean Sea, was a colonial city built by the Sabaris people. It was once a Greek city-state in Italy famous for its roses and 3 temples to the goddesses, 2 temples to Hera and 1 to Athens. However, after the Lucanians moved south 100 years ago, this Greek city-state fell after years of continuous attacks by the Lucanians. It eventually became one of the towns of the tribes of Potentia. In the past few decades, Poseidonia had not been invaded by anyone. In the south, Elia could not even protect itself, so it did not have the strength to attack others. In the north, the Samani preferred the mountains. They would rather invade the stronger and more heavily defended city of Potentia than come to the coast. Therefore, when the Lucanians of Poseidonia learned that the Samani were going to attack Potentia, they did not show much concern for the safety of the city. They only took precautions and put more energy into discussing the problem of how many soldiers to send to reinforce Potentia. However, today, the sentries on the city tower rang the alarm bell. When the leaders and soldiers climbed up the city walls, they were shocked. There were so many Samani outside the city that they could not see the end of them. They did not know how many people there were. The leader of the Pentine, Torek, stood at the front of the formation and looked at the small city in front of him. He saw and heard the panic and screams of the Lucanians on the city walls, but he did not care too much. Instead, he turned around and said to his subordinates, "What are the crossbows sent by the Syracuse called?" "Leader, they are called ballistae," a leader beside him reminded him. "I know, you don't need to say more." Torek stared and said, "Bring the crossbows, the ballistae up. Let us see how powerful these things are." 6 ballistae were placed in front of the formation, but the ones operating them were the Syracuse people. Chapter 402. Amidst the cheers of the Samani warriors, Tolek's face was full of excitement. He knew that the Samani's weakness in sieging cities had been made up for by this terrifying thing, and he was now fully confident in taking down Poseidonia. Not only would they have a better port, it would also be easier for the people of Syracuse to transport more food to them. At the same time, his poor tribesmen would be able to plunder without restraint and reap more benefits. In the evening, a family dinner was being held in the consul's mansion in Thurii. The Devers's 2 wives, adopted daughter Cynthia, adopted son Adoris, and son Clodocatax attended, as well as housekeeping supervisor Asuna, slave supervisor Ribazat, and intelligence supervisor Aristyras. Tonight's main meal was beef and mutton, so everyone had a wooden table, copper pot, and iron stove in front of them. Except for Clodocatax. He was still young, and Christos was worried about him eating meat alone. Christos was 9 months pregnant, so it was not convenient for her to move around. She did not have the energy to take care of him. Little Crow's other mother, Agnes, was pregnant for more than 2 months, and was at the peak of her pregnancy. She could not even look at beef and mutton, and could only eat vegetables such as fruits, mushrooms, and seaweed. Of course, she could not take care of him. Thus, Little Crow and Asuna sat together. At this moment, the Devers who sat at the head of the table looked at everyone and said seriously, "Tomorrow, I will be leaving Thurii for Potentia, so I will not be able to take care of the family. Christos and Agnes are both pregnant, so Asuna, Ribazat, and Aristyras will need you 3 to take good care of the family. I would like to thank you in advance." As he spoke, he raised his glass of wine. While he spoke, Crystal, Stoia, and Agnes looked at their husband with concern, unable to conceal the worry on their beautiful faces. Asuna and Ribazat hurriedly stood up. The Devers hurriedly waved their hands. "Sit down. Sit down. You are already citizens of Dionia, and we are a family. Don't make yourselves like strangers. Learn from Aristyras. Aristyras forced a smile on his cold face. The reason he did not stand up was that he was not used to the humility of Asuna and the others as a former citizen of Kadnai. He picked up his cup and replied seriously, "Don't worry, my lord. I'll have my men keep a close watch on all of Turin. If there's anything out of the ordinary, I'll do as you said and look for Kappas and Cunigarata immediately to eliminate the threat." "All right. The safety of this family depends on you." Devers raised his glass, downed it in one gulp, and refilled it. Asuna immediately said, "Master, I'll take good care of the female slaves in the courtyard and take good care of the two madams. I'll also invite Lord Helps to come and check on them regularly, and we have the protection of the two gods, Hades and Hera." Asuna looked at Christos and Agnes, and said with a smile, "When you return, my lord, the two madams and the children will be very healthy." "Good. Asuna, if everything is safe and sound, I'll reward you well when I return. I'll find you a husband that you're satisfied with, how about that?" The Devers happily teased. Asuna immediately protested, "My lord, you're a dignified consul of Dionia, it's not fair to make fun of me." "My lord, you're busy every day, so you probably don't know yet. Asuna already has someone she likes," Christos said softly from the side. "Oh, is that so?" The Devers became interested and hurriedly asked, "Who is it? Can you tell me?" Asuna blushed and glanced at Aristyras, who was at the next table. She lowered her head in silence. The Devers' heart skipped a beat, and he didn't ask again. "Come, Asuna, thank you for taking care of the two madams and the children. Cheers." Asuna drank it without hesitation. The Devers looked at Aristyras, who seemed to know nothing about this, and said to her, "I'll give you a suggestion. Go ask Agnes more often. With Hera's protection, do you have to be afraid that your wishes won't come true?" Asuna was greatly moved when she heard this. Unexpectedly, Agnes reminded her bluntly, "Love between two people is under the jurisdiction of the goddess of love, Aphrodite. Hera is only responsible for marriage and family. Love without marriage is a lie." The Devers said half jokingly and half seriously, "In Dionia, Hera is also responsible for love before marriage. Madam, you don't have to worry about Asuna's matters. This is my responsibility." Christoia smiled and freed Asuna from the awkwardness. She then said to Ribazat seriously, "Ribazat, I'll leave the affairs of the outer court to you. Don't let miscellaneous matters disturb me during this time." "Madam, don't worry, I'll take care of it. This is my duty." Ribazat respectfully finished the wine in his glass. At this moment, Cynthia said, "Father, I'll take care of mother and my brothers." The Devers heard this and had a face full of joy. "Good, good. Our daughter has grown up and can help the family now. Come, I'll give you a toast too." "Daddy, Daddy, I want to drink this too. I want to take care of mother too." Little Crow also began to shout. "Good, good, good." The Devers shook his slightly drunk head, overjoyed. Late at night, in Christoia's bedroom, Christoia's lazy voice sounded, "I think you should go accompany Agnes. She needs you more right now. Don't talk, rest well." The Devers used his left hand that was around her snow-white neck to pat her shoulder lightly, and said gently. Christoia turned slightly and burrowed her head into the Devers' chest again. She sniffed his scent and murmured, "Tell me, if I give birth to a daughter, I'll call her Eunice, okay?" "Eunice." The Devers muttered the name softly. Eunice means joyful victory. A gentle smile appearing on his face. "Good name. What if it's a son?" "Then we'll call him Apox, which means courage," Christoia said softly without hesitation. It was obvious that she had already thought about it. Devers Apox, Devers Krotokatax. All right, that's the name. The Devers readily agreed. But even after a long time, Christoia did not respond. The Devers looked down. It turned out that his wife had fallen asleep. Pregnant women were very sleepy at this time. The Devers gently straightened her sleeping posture and kissed her smooth and beautiful face affectionately. He then put on Bolton and walked to the outer room where Asuna was guarding. Kristoya is already asleep. Where's the child? Little Crow is asleep too. Take care of them. I'll go check on Agnes. As soon as he entered his second wife's bedroom, he heard Agnes's gentle and hopeful voice. Devers, is that you? Why aren't you sleeping? This isn't good for the child. The Devers softly scolded her and lovingly picked her up from the bedside. He wanted to put her on the bed, but Agnes wrapped her arms around his neck and whispered worriedly, I'm a little worried. The Devers hugged her delicate body and lay down on the bed with her. What are you worried about? There's nothing to worry about. With the protection of Hades, your husband, I have never lost on the battlefield. I promise you I'll be back soon. The Devers' confident promise made Agnes's worries dissipate a little. She hugged her husband tightly and asked softly after a long time, Are my parents in danger? The Devers was stunned. In fact, if a war broke out between Dionia and Syracuse, Ligwam would be in the most danger. It was cut off by Rockley and its allies and far from the center of southern Italy, making it the most vulnerable to enemy attacks. But at this moment the Devers could not tell the truth. He said in a low voice, Our southern Italian coalition will not let Syracuse threaten Ligwam so easily. But for safety's sake, you should advise your family to hide in Turiae for the time being. Turiae had Adelai Cruz's shipyard, so it would be easier to contact them. Yes. Agnes replied softly. The next day, the soldiers of the 1st and 2nd Legions, who had been mobilized for war since early in the morning, took an oath at the Victory Square in Turiae. Then, nearly 20,000 soldiers and the supply camp set out majestically towards the west. The people of Turiae and Amendola came to see them off. In their eyes, this was the first time the 1st and 2nd Legions were fighting in a distant and unfamiliar region. The furthest the army had gone before was Corunna, but it was a Greek city-state with frequent trade links. They could reach it in a day by boat. This time, they were fighting in an unfamiliar mountainous region where the natives ran rampant. Naturally, they were more worried about their loved ones. Thus, the people sent them off again and again, unwilling to leave for a long time. At the end of the expedition, the Devers were bidding farewell to the elders, Lord Cunegurata, Lord Cornelis. Lords, I'll leave the politics of Dionia to you. The Devers solemnly saluted the elders who were sending them off. Lord, if there's anything, we'll send someone to discuss it with you. Cunegurata promised. When soon? Come back soon. Cornelis said expectantly. The Devers nodded and turned to Vespa. Don't worry, the Samanai won't be able to charge into our Lucanian territory. Lord Consul, please pay more attention to the Lucanians in Potentia. Hemont requested. I'll do my best, the Devers replied. He looked at Hieronymus and Capus, and the two of them saluted him. The matters of the army had been arranged beforehand, so there was no need for him to say anything more. Chapter 403. The Devers mounted his horse and held down the restless war horse. He said confidently, My lords, wait for the news of my victory. After he finished speaking, he turned his horse around and squeezed his legs hard. The restless warhorse carried him and galloped away, following the long line of people all the way to the north. Along the way, they were accompanied by the spontaneous cheers and expectations of the people. Lord Divers, please bring them back safely. May the Hades bless you with an easy victory. There were two routes from Turiae to Potentia. One was to cross the wooden bridge over the Krati River, head west to Abyssinia, then to Cosenza, then turn north to Vigo City, then to Laus, take a boat to Picassus, and finally reach Potentia. Alternatively, they could travel by land from Laus, pass through Nudum, Gramentum, and finally reach Potentia. The second route was to head west from Turiae, trekking through the Tuyu Avenue to Nudum, then head north to Potentia. Due to the completion of the Tuyu Avenue, it would only take 3 days for a large group of troops to travel from Turiae to Nudum. For the Devers who understood the importance of speed in war, of course, they chose the latter route. On the second day after they entered the western mountains, the Devers received an urgent battle report from Grimentum. The Simonians had taken down the city of Poseidonia. The Devers fell into deep thought. He quickly found Antonius and Amyntas, the two commanders, to discuss the matter. In the end, they changed their initial plan and sent a messenger back to inform the Grimentum and Picassus to make preparations immediately. 3 days later, the Devers led the troops to Dara River Fortress, where he unexpectedly met Hinepolis. "Herne, why are you here?" the Devers asked, slightly surprised. "I haven't seen you for a long time. I heard that you were going to lead an army to Potentia, so I came to greet you." Hinepolis smiled happily as he greeted him. Devers looked at Hinepolis, who was about the same age as him. He couldn't help but feel touched, but he still cautiously asked, "How is the situation in Lars City right now?" "Very stable," Hinepolis blurted out. Seeing the Devers' doubtful expression, he added, "It's really much better. Ever since Mr. Ansitanos advised me, I've been discussing things with Uncle and the rest. Uncle is also willing to implement some of the laws that I've promulgated." "That's good." Devers nodded and said no more. After all, Hinepolis was already the head of a state, and he didn't want to interfere with Lau's internal affairs. He looked at Hinepolis and said, "But you came at the right time. I was just about to look for you. I just heard the news that the Samni have taken over Poseidonia." "I heard that too." Hinepolis was a little confused. "How will this affect Laos?" Devers said straightforwardly, "I plan to lead the army from Laos port to Picassus. I calculated that a passenger ship can carry 50 people. To transport this army, we need at least 400 ships, and this doesn't include the cavalry and the supply camp. Herne, do you think Laos can provide so many ships?" Devers looked at Hinepolis with concern. "Of course," Hinepolis said cheerfully. "Laos can use merchant ships to transport the army for you, but I have a small request." At this point, Hinepolis smiled proudly. "What request?" Devers didn't have time to joke with him, and asked directly. "As a member of Dionia's alliance, Laos should send an army to battle with Dionia according to the treaty. I hope that I will lead Laos's army to go to Potentia with you." Hinepolis looked at Devers with anticipation. After the novelty of being the first consul, he was tired of dealing with so many affairs and facing so many obstacles. He wanted to go out and relax. The arrival of Devers provided him with a good opportunity. "Sure." Devers pondered for a while before agreeing to it. As an ally of Dionia, Laos was obligated to send troops. With Hinepolis leading the army, it would also increase the prestige of this young man who had just become an consul. Just as the Devers changed their marching route and turned towards Laos, the port of Syracuse was already filled with thousands of ships, and there were still thousands of ships outside the port. Almost all the passenger ships and merchant ships of Sicily under Syracuse's control were concentrated on the waters of Syracuse, completely turning the port, the naturally formed circular bay outside the port of Syracuse, into a land paved with ship planks. At the port and in the city, there were more than 100,000 people bustling about for the army's expedition across the sea. Such a grand and spectacular scene left Phoebus, who came from Sparta, dumbfounded. Dionysius glanced at him and pointed at the sea of people gathered at the port, waiting to board the ships, and said with a sigh, "A few decades ago, Athens sent more than 40,000 troops to Sicily in an attempt to conquer Syracuse. At that time, although the people of Syracuse did not surrender, we were panicking all day long, thinking that the disaster of Syracuse was coming. If today," Dionysius swung his fist forward with force, and his voice was filled with pride and heroism, "if the people of Athens dare to come again, I only need to send half of the army to make sure they never return." Phoebus still said bluntly, "Dionysius, other things aside, isn't it because of the existence of your enemy Dionia that you sent such a huge army?" Dionysius's mouth twitched a few times, then he laughed and said, "I'm afraid the people of Dionia are now having a headache about how to defeat the Simonians. Phoebidas, the reason why I sent a powerful army of nearly 80,000 people is mainly to deal with the southern Italian coalition. Although each of these Greek city-states is not very strong, it's still a little troublesome when they come together. Besides, after we defeat those city-states, we must station some troops in the cities to make them obey us, don't you think so?" Listening to Dionysius's complacent laughter, Phoebidas felt that it was very harsh to his ears. The last time he came to Syracuse, Dionysius was not so arrogant, and he was still respectful to him as the messenger of Sparta. But now, Sparta was deeply involved in the war, and Syracuse's strength was growing rapidly. Sparta's need for Syracuse was far greater than Syracuse's need for Sparta. Time has changed. Phoebidas thought of this, forcibly suppressing the dissatisfaction in his heart, and said no more. Of course, Dionysius also stopped provoking the young and arrogant general of Sparta. After all, he still needed him in the battle against Dionia. There was a cold silence between the two, and they both looked at the port under the watchtower. After a while, Leptines, the commander of the navy, boarded the watchtower built at the west end of Ortygia Island. He said respectfully to the helpless Dionysius, "Brother, the soldiers have boarded the ships. They are waiting for you to give the order, and then lead them to Greece." "Got it." Dionysius nodded, then said to Phoebidas, "We should go down too, don't let the army wait too long." After saying that, he turned around and went down the tower, and Phoebidas followed him. A magnificent chariot with 4 horses was already waiting under the tower. Dionysius directly stepped onto the chariot, with no intention of inviting Phoebidas to ride with him. A guard next to them brought the war horse, and Phoebidas and Leptines got on it one after another. "Let's go," Dionysius said. The 100 cavalrymen in front of them galloped back the way they came. The driver shook the reins, and the horses neighed as they began to pull the chariot. The 100 cavalrymen at the back also followed the chariot, and Dionysius was tightly surrounded in the center. The whole team passed through the tall city wall that separated Ortygia Island from Syracuse, and drove through the city center. There were already many people waiting on both sides of the street. When the cavalrymen passed, they cheered, and Dionysius kept waving in response from the chariot. This made Phoebidas, who was riding behind him, confused. Didn't the people of Syracuse hate Dionysius's dictatorship? Why did it seem like Dionysius was loved by the people? In fact, the people of Syracuse had mixed feelings about Dionysius. On one hand, they hated Dionysius's oppressive rule and excessive taxation. On the other hand, they also enjoyed the security, strength, glory, and pride that Dionysius brought to Syracuse. If they could conquer Greece, there would definitely be a large amount of wealth and land flowing back to Syracuse, which was what the people longed for. At this moment, Dionysius, who was standing on the chariot, was enjoying the feeling of waving to the people. Due to the fear of assassination and riots, he had not held a public gathering for 7 or 8 years. He even thought, "I heard that Dionia has a triumphal victory celebration, which can bestow great glory to the returning generals. This time, after conquering Greece, when I return, I will definitely hold a triumphal ceremony of my own in Syracuse city." The team entered the port, and the ministers were already waiting in front of the dock. "Lord Dionysius! Lord General! General Quan!" Everyone saluted. Dionysius, who was dressed in golden armor, walked out of the chariot and waved goodbye to everyone. Finally, he walked up to Philistos and held his hands tightly. "Philly, after I leave, I entrust Syracuse to you." Chapter 404. From the looks of it, Carthage won't do anything, but don't let your guard down. Also, Gela, Leontini, Camalina, Agrigento. Once these affiliated city-states discover any signs of rebellion, get Macias to send troops to wipe them out immediately. Dionysius instructed in a low voice. "Understood, sir." Philistos nodded with a focused expression. Dionysius stared at him for a moment, then stepped forward and gave him a strong hug. "I'll leave everything here to you, my friend." Philistos was about to reply when he heard Dionysius whisper in his ear coldly, "This is a critical period. Once you discover any abnormalities in the city, immediately arrest and behead those traitors who want to disrupt this great expedition, understand?" Dionysius's cold words made Philistos' heart skip a beat. At this moment Dionysius happened to see Herolas, who was not far behind Philistos, talking to someone else. He added in a low voice, "Also, don't trust Herolas too much. Don't let him participate in any city-state affairs while I'm not around." "Understood, sir." Philistos was stunned for a moment, then immediately responded. Dionysius, Phoebidas, and the rest boarded a three-tiered oar warship. Dionysius waved at the people on the dock smugly. "Everyone, you will soon hear the news of my victory. Next year, I will bring Syracuse a great Greece whose wealth and land area are no less than that of Sicily." After saying this, he put on a purple cloak and took a golden helmet decorated with colorful feathers from his attendant. After putting it on, he looked even more heroic and extraordinary. "Set off." Amidst the cheers of his officials, he gave the order. On this day, almost all merchant ships sailing in the Strait of Messina witnessed this unprecedented spectacular sight. Thousands of warships, merchant ships, and passenger ships sailed north. The length of the fleet stretched from the southeast corner of Sicily to the tip of the Apennine Peninsula, almost cutting off the eastern sea route of the Strait of Messina. Every ship's sail was painted with an eye-catching, three-legged pattern, so no ships dared to cross this seemingly endless fleet, lest they be treated as intruders and sunk. Many experienced ship owners immediately sensed that something big was about to happen. They all turned around or took a detour, hurrying back to their cities to deliver this shocking news. Hinepolis's messenger quickly returned to Laos and conveyed the order: Dionia's army will pass through the port of Laos to go to Picassus. Arabuma of the Devers's sudden change of route was really nervous. He immediately agreed and did his best to supervise this matter. Therefore, by the time Dionia's army arrived at Dalos, the few hundred merchant ships that had been temporarily requisitioned and the Dalos army that accompanied them to the battle were basically ready. "Lord Devers, welcome to Laos." Arabuma led the important officials of Laos to welcome him at the city gate. The Devers sat on his horse and saw Arabuma leading a group of people to salute him. He could not help but have an illusion that Arabuma was the master of this city, and the little guy beside him. He glanced at Hinepolis and suppressed this strange thought. He then jumped off his horse, took off his helmet, and handed it to the guard beside him. "Lord Arabuma, thank you for your help to Dionia." He returned Arabuma's salute seriously. "This is Laos's responsibility as an ally." The man in his 40s replied respectfully with his head lowered. Hinepolis shouted from his horse, "Uncle, I want to follow Lord Devers to Potentia this time." Arabuma lifted his head and looked at him with a complicated expression. "I have no objections to this, but you have to discuss this with your mother." "All right, I'll tell her now." Hinepolis immediately rode his horse into the city. At this moment the Devers said, "Hinepolis is still a child. He lacks experience in politics. He has caused a lot of turmoil in Laos recently. Thanks to you, Laos has been able to maintain its stability. Henny is only a few years older than you, but look at him." Arabuma blurted out impulsively when he heard this. When the Devers looked at him in surprise, he realized that his tone was a little harsh, so he quickly changed his words and complained, "Sigh, Henny has been a stubborn child since he was young. But managing a city-state wasn't something you could do as you pleased. All the officials have been holding a grudge against him recently. He's still young. He needs more time to slowly familiarize himself with the affairs of the city. That's why it's very important that you help him as an uncle. Of course, I'll also guide him during this expedition." On the surface, the Devers seemed to be comforting Arabuma, but his words revealed his support and protection for Hnepolis. Arabuma, of course, could understand the meaning behind his words. He felt a little disappointed, and at the same time, the thought that had been suppressed in his heart slowly loosened. Sir Devers, I heard that tens of thousands of Samanai have invaded Potentia this time. Will it be difficult to repel them? Arabuma suddenly asked. The Devers glanced at him and said, As long as the Alliance is in trouble, no matter how difficult it is, Dionia will do its best to help. Moreover, for Dionia, defeating the Samanai is only a matter of time. Yes, yes. Arabuma smiled and said, Sir Devers, you're a general who has won every battle. The Devers smiled and turned to see that the troops were ready. He asked, Can we enter the city now? Of course. 600 cargo ships are already waiting at the port, Arbutus said hurriedly. Lord Divers, you've had a hard time on this march. I've held a banquet at home to celebrate your arrival. Please have a meal before you leave. There's still plenty of time. Sir Arabuma, thank you for your invitation. However, the war is urgent now. I'll attend your banquet after I return victorious. By then, you'll have to prepare a more sumptuous meal. Not only will I be attending, but a few other commanders will also be attending. The Devers rejected politely as if he was joking. Then I'll be waiting for you to return victorious, Arabuma said with a smile. In fact, he did not mean to treat them to a banquet. He was just feeling inexplicably nervous standing in front of the Devers, so he said it casually. The bugle began to sound and the war drums were beating rhythmically. The Dionysian army began to enter the city. At the front was a standard-bearer in bright armor, holding a large flag. In the center of the flag was a double fork with black hair entwined around it, surrounded by colorful gems. This was the flag that represented the city alliance of Dionia. Then came the cavalry. Since the Brutty region was incorporated into the Dionia alliance, the number of Dionia cavalry had greatly increased. The establishment of the cavalry had increased to 2,000, and they were officially promoted from a cavalry brigade to a legion. Although the mountains of Potentia were not suitable for cavalry battles, and although it was said that the Samanai cavalry did not have many, the Devers still brought 1,000 cavalrymen. They were led by the commander of the cavalry legion, Leds. The cavalry at the front raised the Pegasus flag, and the following cavalrymen lined up in 3 rows. All of them wore black leather helmets and black leather armor. They held spears in their right hands and black leather shields in their left hand. They entered the city in a neat formation. Then came the First Legion. Although the Dionia army had entered the city of Laos during the conquest of the Brutty region, a few years later, the people of Laos were shocked when they saw the soldiers of the Legion in uniform. The whole army was almost black, and even the shields that the Greeks loved to display their freedom were painted with a double-cross pattern. They were uniform, neat, and orderly. Coupled with their huge numbers and high morale, the Dionysian army marched on the main road of Laos in a procession-like manner. Be it the nobles, officials, civilians, or slaves of Laos, all of them were dumbfounded and terrified, including Arabuma who accompanied the Devers. He quickly excused himself with the excuse that he had to make arrangements for Hnepolis's expedition. He then hid on the roof of his mansion and watched the Dionia army marching towards the port with a complicated expression on his face. Throughout the long period of time, he kept thinking about one question. The Dionysian army is so powerful, can Syracuse really defeat it? He finally heaved a sigh of relief when the Dionysian army finally left the city. The news of the invasion of Syracuse first reached Lygium. Not only did it cause panic among the people in the city, but the council in the city hall was also in a mess. Lord Attilicus, what should we do? The Syracuse army is coming. According to the ship owners who reported the news, the Syracuse fleet has covered the entire sea. Oh, that's terrifying. I estimate that there are more than 100,000 soldiers being transported. Lord Attilicus, you must immediately request for reinforcements from the Aeolian Alliance and the Southern Alliance. Otherwise, when the Syracuse army enters Greece, Lygium will be finished. At this moment, a guard hurriedly came in to report, "My lords, urgent report from the port lighthouse. A fleet has sailed out of Messina. There are about 80 warships heading towards our port." Chapter 405. It's over. Our port is going to be sealed. Lygium is finished. Attilitus, you must immediately let Dionia send a fleet to chase away the people of Messina. Immediately send a messenger to negotiate with Dionysius. Dionysius's enemy is Dionia, not us. As long as we offer him gold and silver, he'll accept Lygium. Enough. All of you be quiet. Attilitus roared, shocking everyone. The people of Syracuse are still at sea, and you're already panicking like this? If you wait for them to disembark, won't you have to surrender immediately? Look at you, you're not even comparable to an ordinary militia. Dionysius has long wanted to occupy Lygium, so that he can monopolize the Strait of Messina and obtain a huge amount of wealth. He won't agree to our negotiation. Whoever dares to betray the interests of the city-state, I'll let the guards feed him to the fishes. Attilitus scolded angrily. Not only did he scare the people who wanted to negotiate to lower their heads, but the others were also ashamed. Then, he looked at the only man in the city hall who wasn't shouting or panicking. He asked with a serious expression, "Phaedon, facing this terrible situation, do you have any suggestions?" Phaedon was known as the citizen of Lygium who was the least like a Lygium. He was tough, serious, and decisive. When he was first elected as a general, he didn't listen to anyone's advice and intercession. He strictly investigated the tax evasion at the port and offended a large number of merchants in Lygium. Lygium was originally a city-state with a developed trade. Many members of the council made up of rich people made things difficult for him. Since then, Phaedon was never elected as a general or a council again. Until last year, when the army of Syracuse had reached the other side of the strait, the panicking people of Lygium remembered this courageous citizen, and he was elected as a general again. At this moment, he said with a serious expression, "Syracuse's army landed at Rockley. Although it's not too far from Lygium, the Montalto Mountains, the southernmost part of the Apennines, the highest peak is nearly 2,000 meters, are very difficult to cross. If Syracuse wants to attack us, they can only use the rugged mountain path along the coast to reach Rockley. Therefore, as long as we send troops to guard the mountain pass, Syracuse's troops won't be able to do anything." Adelai Cruz said excitedly, "You think the same as me." Phaedon didn't mind the chief general's attempt to flatter him. He continued, "Of course we have to be careful of Syracuse. They'll go west from Locri, pass through the famous ancient road that connects the east and west coasts, and reach Medmar. They'll then go south to attack Taurina and open up a path to attack Lygium. This is indeed a very worrying problem." After Phaedon's explanation, Adelai Cruz's messy thoughts were cleared up. He frowned and thought for a while, then said loudly, "We have to remind Taurina to strengthen its defense, and be on guard against the enemy that might attack from the north. Also, we have to send reinforcements to Taurina. Otherwise, with its strength, even with the Maro River as a barrier, it'll be hard to defend against the attack of Syracuse's army." The people who were panicking before now nodded in agreement. Adelai Cruz ignored them, and asked in a hurried and humble tone, "Phaedon, is there anything else we need to consider? With the outbreak of this war, our trade route will definitely be cut off. Sirs, don't worry about your own trade anymore," Phaedon said seriously. "Even if our original warships stay here, they won't be a match for Syracuse's fleet. It's better to leave it to Dionia. At least they can form a stronger fleet and cause some trouble for Syracuse." Phaedon's words made some people feel ashamed. "You're right. That's why I want to leave the warships to Dionia." Adelai Cruz immediately followed up. Someone retorted, "Syracuse are not idiots. They might use their fleet to bypass the coastal path and land near Lygum. Phaedon shook his head and said, "We all know that the coastline near the Strait of Messina is mostly steep cliffs and covered with reef. There are very few good beaches and bays, and the best two are already occupied by us," referring to the city of Lygum and the port, which are located in two different places. "That's why we're only going to defend the remaining few beaches. I believe that no matter how strong Syracuse's army is, they won't dare to land in front of our well-fortified formation and sacrifice so much." Phaedon's words made the fear in the people's hearts dissipate. Adelai Cruz seized the opportunity and said, "Now, I suggest that Phaedon be the commander of Lygum's army." Almost no one objected. Phaedon accepted the appointment with a solemn expression and said to the chief general, "Sir Adelai Cruz, while we strengthen our defense, we must immediately ask for reinforcements from Dionia. If Syracuse and Rockley attack Torino with full force, even if the soldiers from both cities work together, it will be difficult to defend against them." "Don't worry." Adelai Cruz had already thought it through. He forced a smile and said, "I believe that Dionia, Crotone, and Silatina will soon find out that Syracuse has landed on Rockley. The Southern Alliance will be formed soon. How would Syracuse dare to attack us with full force in the face of a war?" "That's right. That's right." The others also echoed in agreement. "Of course, we must quickly contact Dionia and inform them of our current situation. We must discuss our next step with them. Considering that the enemy's fleet is already patrolling the eastern sea of Greece, we must immediately send an emissary on a fast ship to the port of Napatisha and head for Thurii." Adelai Cruz made his decision. The shocking news of Syracuse's army landing on Rockley spread across Greece. The citizens of Dionia were much calmer than the citizens of the other cities. They had never suffered a defeat before, and they firmly believed in their army, their senate, and especially their magical consul. Cunegurata and Calnarus bumped into each other on their way to the Senate. "The worst has happened. Syracuse is really here. I heard that Dionysius is leading an army of no less than 100,000. Calnarus said gloomily as he walked. "That's why we must get Hieronymus to form the two new armies immediately." Cunegurata's mood was not much better than Calnarus. Felicius and Ansitanos should have received the news by now. I hope they can urge Crotone, Silitanos, and the other allies to form their armies as soon as possible. The storm is coming. Everyone is on the same boat, and no one can hide from it. I believe that Crotone and Silitanos will not hesitate this time. Calnarus was more certain of this. Yes, we can only rely on them for now. Cunegurata sighed. At this critical moment, he realized that the citizens of Dionia, the Senate, and himself were all relying on the young consul. Where is Sir Devers? Has he received the news of Syracuse's army's attack? There was an urgent report from the north yesterday. Sir Devers has arrived at Fort Laus with his army and is preparing to head to Laus and take a boat to Picassus. It will take a day for the messenger to travel from Fort Laus to Turin at full speed. I believe he has already arrived at Picassus and is with Antares. He will soon receive the news of Syracuse's invasion of Greece, Calnarus said. The elders of the Senate were paying close attention to the Devers movement. Cunegurata had been busy helping Sicerian build the military port and had forgotten to ask about the Devers. I hope he can defeat the Simonians as soon as possible. Come back as soon as possible, Cunegurata said with anticipation. At this time, they were about to cross the Victory Square where a group of children were playing. Some young people were practicing running around the square, mainly because the arena and other venues in Turin were occupied by the citizens for ball games, causing the rapidly expanding city of Turin to be unable to accommodate the citizens for fitness and sports training. Some old people were lying on the ground basking in the sun while leaning on the steps or memorial pillars. Some people were reading books that they had just copied from the library. There was a temporary wooden platform in the center of the square. The teachers from the Faculty of Mathematics were teaching simple arithmetic knowledge to the public, attracting many people to listen and learn. This was a good habit developed by the two disciples of Pythagoras in Amendolara and had been persisted since then. This was because the dean of the Faculty of Mathematics, Mentodicus, had always thought that this was the best way to expand the influence of their faculty and attract good students. Ever since Lysias became the dean of the Faculty of Arts, he did not want to be outdone. Every day, he would also send teachers to the Victory Square to stand in front of the bill announcement board under the steps of the Senate to read the contents of the newly issued bill announcement to the public, explaining the application of some common grammar, pointing out some rhetorical errors in the announcement. This made the scribes in the Senate very careful, fearing that they would make mistakes, and also talking about the legal provisions of Dionia as well as debating skills. Naturally, this attracted many people to listen and learn. Chapter 406. Standing on the steps in front of the Senate, Cunegurata looked back at everything in front of him. The peace and harmony of the square reminded him of the painful memories in his heart. His expression gradually became determined. It's not easy for the Dionia alliance to reach what it is today. We must not allow the people of Syracuse to destroy it. Cornelius, who also had painful memories, no longer had his usual gentleness. Even if we have to donate all our money, we must win this war. Only then can the people of Dionia have a future. Syracuse was very busy these few days. On one hand, he had to reorganize the mixed fleet from various alliances that had just gathered in Thurii. On the other hand, he had to establish the subdivisions, arrange the accommodation and food for the sailors, maintain the warships, install the crews, and many other matters. On the other hand, he had to participate in and guide the construction of the dry dock, the naval port, and set up the cordon to prevent anyone from approaching and watching the naval training. Now, the stretch of river from the port to the shrine of Hera had become a large construction site. Thousands of Dionia people were busy building and expanding the naval base. With the help of the Ministry of Military Affairs and the Thurii City Hall, Syracuse was much more relaxed. But what worried him the most was that the two new legions had not been formed yet, and he could not practice his new tactics at all. So when the news that the army of Syracuse had landed in Rockley, and Syracuse's fleet of nearly 500 warships were stationed in the northern sea of Rockley to protect Syracuse's troop transport fleet, not only did the Devers's warning and plan, he also did not have the slightest desire to go to war. In the headquarters of the Southern Alliance of Cilicia, the representatives of the various city-states, led by Ansitanos, put aside unnecessary quarrels and quickly reached an agreement. The city-states of the Southern Alliance would do their best to send as many troops as possible to form a coalition army, and the commander of the coalition army would temporarily be Felicius. If the Devers were to lead the troops into battle, the position of commander-in-chief would naturally belong to him. However, he was not around, so the representatives of the various city-states believed that Felicius's prestige was not enough to make the generals of the other city-states completely follow the White Tiger. He could only be a temporary replacement. Furthermore, Felicius had to discuss with the generals of the other city-states before making any important decisions. In addition, the Allied army could freely march, station, and set up camp in any city-state or territory of the Southern Alliance. The rations were provided by each city-state according to its strength. Of course, Dionia had the most, but Crotone and Lygium also had a lot. Fortunately, it was only the end of October, and the autumn harvest had just ended, so the citizens of each city-state had enough food to spare. The granary specially built by the Alliance of Dionia a few years ago was full, so there was no worry of food shortage for the time being. Once the agreement was reached, the representatives of the various cities immediately returned to their respective cities and urged them to dispatch their troops. Only 2 people did not move. Ansitanos did so because Dionia had already made preparations before the Devers left. He only needed to wait for the arrival of the 4th and 5th legions in the west courtyard. The other person was the emissary of Corunna, Alapados. Because Corunna was already at the front line of the battlefield, the entire Corunna had begun to mobilize for war, preparing to defend against the attack of Syracuse. As the emissary, he had a great responsibility. He had to stay here and urge the reinforcements of the other city-states to hurry to Corunna as soon as possible. Sir Ansitanos, are you sure that the army of Dionia has already set off? He asked anxiously again. When I set off from Asprostum, our Legio IV had already gathered their soldiers in the square. Based on my understanding of the Alliance's army, they should be on their way now. That's good. That's good, Alapados said, but he was fidgeting as if he had a sore on his butt. He then asked, Then, has the 5th Legion of yours set off too? The commander of the 5th Legion of Dionia doesn't have any hobbies other than fighting. As soon as he receives the order, he will definitely gather his troops and set off immediately. I even think that the 5th Legion may set off earlier than Legio IV, Ansitanos said seriously. Alapados calmed down a little. Ansitanos saw him stomping his feet and tapping the wooden table with his right hand, looking anxious. He could not help but remind him, I suggest that you go to the city hall of Silatina and urge them to mobilize the militia as soon as possible. Silatina? Alapados was a little confused. According to the agreement, their army was not going to Corunna. Ansitanos explained to him seriously, Silatina, Trine, and Crotone are in charge of defending the north bank of the Ramato River, but if the people of Syracuse cross the Ramato River and circle to the north of Corunna, then our plan to stop the people of Syracuse in the territory of Rockley and its allies will fail. Alapados immediately came to his senses. He immediately stood up and said, You're right. I'll go find Sir Pratines now. On this day, in Rockley, Dionysius encountered a problem. His original plan was for the entire fleet to sail north from Syracuse early in the morning and reach Rockley in a day. Therefore, he specially asked the most experienced sailors to pick a day when the main force of Dionia was going to travel to Potentia. At the same time, it was a peaceful day. The huge fleet arrived at Lockley without a hitch, but after entering the port, they encountered a lot of trouble. Rockley did not have a natural port like Syracuse, which could easily accommodate thousands of ships. Rockley's port was also not as big as Syracuse's. It could only accommodate 500 to 600 ships at a time. At the same time, as a city-state, Rockley had limited manpower. It had never handled a series of landing procedures for nearly 10,000 ships at the port, such as arrival, unloading, transportation, leaving, and rotation. This required sufficient labor, orderly organization, strong management, and rich experience. Rockley did not have all of these. In order to keep it a secret and achieve the purpose of a surprise attack, Dionysius had sent a clipper to Rockley the day before. Therefore, Rockley was not fully prepared. As a result, a large number of goods could not be cleaned in time after being unloaded. They piled up at the port, blocking the way for the soldiers to go ashore. The soldiers of Syracuse had to clean them up themselves. The soldiers who had been drifting at sea for almost a day were very tired. They were eager to rest. Of course, they were angry and would have conflicts with the workers at the port if they did not agree. The ships that had finished unloading were eager to leave through the gaps, while the ships that came to unload were eager to dock. How could the officials in Rockley take care of so many ships? Ships collided with each other and crew members fell into the water from time to time. There were even a few ships that were collided with each other and ended up capsizing due to the damage to their hulls. Outside the port, thousands of ships stopped on the sea. Whether it was the sailors or the soldiers, they were all eager to go ashore and rest. The ship owners were anxious to complete their task quickly and leave. They were worried that although the sea conditions were good, the weather in the Mediterranean Sea was ever-changing. If a sudden storm came, all the ships would be smashed to the shore. They would not even have a place to hide, and would be crushed together. Dionysius was one of the first to go ashore. When he saw that Rockley Port had quickly descended into chaos, he was extremely anxious. He even lost his temper with his brother-in-law, Demodorus, who had always welcomed him. However, anger was useless. The problem was there and it had to be solved as soon as possible. Therefore, Dionysius had no choice but to strictly order the people who had already gone ashore to work as laborers. They had to listen to the commands of the people at Rockley Port to help move the goods, clear the port, and mediate the conflict. At the same time, he had no choice but to order all the transport ships outside the port to land at the beach near Rockley and let the soldiers go ashore. After giving these orders, Dionysius knew that the terrible situation at Rockley Port would be greatly improved. However, there were still a lot of things to deal with. Without 2 to 3 days to settle and reorganize, the army of Syracuse would not be able to send out their troop. In order to not see and not feel annoyed, Dionysius left a few generals and ministers in charge of coordinating and commanding the landing. He left the port with Phoebidas and the others and entered Rockley City. It was Phoebidas's first time in Rockley. While he was carefully looking at the buildings in the city, he heard Dionysius ask softly, "Phoebidas, where do you think our first target should be?" Phoebidas glanced at him, then glanced at the others who were separated by the guards behind them. He felt strange. Previously, when he was in Syracuse, he had already expressed his opinion to this tyrant. Why hadn't he made up his mind yet? "So," he said with certainty again, "my first choice is still Corunna." Hearing this, Dionysius fell silent. He understood Phoebidas's intention. While the various city-states of the Southern Alliance were not ready for war, he would attack so quickly that they could not form an alliance. However, the reason why he was hesitating was not because the army of Syracuse was like a wolf entering a flock of sheep. However, there were too many fat sheep, and he did not know which one to eat first. It was because he already had a target in his heart, and that was Lygum. Chapter 407. In order to prepare for this great war, Dionysius had not only raised taxes on the people of Syracuse and depleted his own treasury, but he had also borrowed money from the city-state of Cyrenaica in Africa. He had even thought of robbing the sanctuary of Delphi, because there were not just tens of thousands of gold and silver that had been donated to Delphi by the various Greek city-states for hundreds of years. In real history, Dionysius had sent mercenaries to pretend to be bandits in an attempt to rob Delphi during his occupation of Great Greece, but the plot failed in the end. If he captured Lygum, not only could he directly obtain a large amount of wealth to make up for the deficit in the treasury, but he could also completely monopolize the Strait of Messina. Just the taxes from the passing merchant ships would be enough to sustain his long-term occupation of Great Greece. As for the purely military considerations of removing the nail behind him, Lygum, before the army attacked north, he really did not care too much. Phoebidas was not in Dionysius's position. Of course, he could not consider this war from an economic perspective and thus understand Dionysius's hesitation. As a stubborn Sparta, although he had already stated his reasons for choosing Corunia before he set off, he still decided to say it again to strengthen Dionysius's determination. Although Lygum is isolated by Locri and isolated from the Southern Alliance, it's not easy to attack it. I've seen the map you gave me. There are insurmountable mountains in the center of the north of Lygum, and the east coast can only be reached by narrow mountain roads. To go to the west coast, we have to pass through the Maro River and capture its substate, Taurina, before we can open the road to Lygum. The people of Lygum and Taurina will definitely defend the south bank of the Maro River with all their strength. The area there is narrow and not conducive for the deployment of the main forces of Syracuse. It will take some time to attack the territory of Lygum, but the Southern Italy Alliance will use this time to build an army and prepare for the defense of Corunna and Trine. They may even attack Locri when we attack Lygum. If we delay until the consul of Dionia returns with the main force from Lucania municipality, our war in Great Greece will not be easy. Phoebida's last two sentences shocked Dionysius, even though he seemed to be unconcerned. I'm afraid it won't be easy for the Dionysian army led by the Devers to rush back from the Lucania mountains. His troubles have just begun. As long as we seize the moment and continue to attack the north before the Southern Alliance is ready for war, we will definitely be able to completely destroy their alliance. When that time comes, Lygium will be nothing more than a fish in a net. He won't be able to escape. Even if the main forces of Dionia can return from Lucania city, they won't be of much help to the entire battlefield. Dionysius didn't say anything, but Phoebidas's persuasion had already made him decide. At dusk, the door of the Southern Alliance's headquarters was suddenly pushed open. Olopatos's entourage shouted, "Sir! Sir! The army of Dionia has arrived." Olopatos, who was drowsy from exhaustion, couldn't believe his ears. They arrived so soon. In the afternoon, at his urging, he saw with his own eyes that the Siltine City Hall had sent out cavalry to inform all the citizens of the city. According to the common practice of the Greek city-states, when the citizens of Siltine received the notice to join the war, they would need at least a day to settle their affairs at home. Only then would they pick up the weapons and equipment stored at home and rush to the square in Siltine. It was considered fast to be able to complete the assembly and roll call of the citizen soldiers the day after tomorrow. As for the formation of the troops, the preparation of the supplies. When everything was ready, the chief general of Siltine, Prethenus, promised him that he would try his best to lead the troops to set off in 3 days. Olopatos was quite satisfied with the performance of Siltine today compared to the previous preparations of his city-state. Hence, when Ansitanos said that, he only thought that the scholar wanted to show Dionia's positive attitude. In his heart, he didn't think that the Dionia could really do it. Therefore, when Dionia learned of the invasion of Syracuse, and they really arrived at Siltine, Olopatos was pleasantly surprised. "Sir Ansitanos, that's great. Thank you so much." He hurriedly thanked Ansitanos, who was equally exhausted. Ansitanos wasn't arrogant. He waved his hand and said, "This has nothing to do with me. You should thank the soldiers of Dionia who rushed all the way here. You have to know that it's more than 80 kilometers from Asprustum to Siltine. It's really not easy to get here in a day." "You're right." After receiving Ansitanos's reminder, Olopatos hurried out of the city. When they arrived, the soldiers of Dionia's Legio IV had already started to set up a simple camp by the road south of Siltine city. Olopatos couldn't help but feel apologetic when he saw them half-naked and drenched in sweat. They followed the soldiers' directions and found Commander Felicius, who was sitting on the grass discussing some matters with Epitenes. "Lord Ansitanos, why are you here?" Epicthenes shouted before him with his sharp eyes. "Since you've worked so hard to get here, of course I have to come and visit you," Ansitanos said seriously. The rapid arrival of the 4th Legion shocked the Siltine and the other city-states of the Southern Alliance. It could be said to be a very good example, and it also made Ansitanos's words carry more weight in the alliance. He felt honored as well. "Who comes empty-handed?" Epitenes said in a half-joking, half-serious tone. "Epitenes!" Felicius quickly gave him a look, signaling him not to go overboard. Ansitanos didn't mind it too much. After all, they often met in the Senate, and he knew what kind of person Epitenes was. He smiled and said, "What do you want me to bring?" "Not me, it's the soldiers who have been working hard for the whole day. They don't even have time to find water when they're thirsty, and now they have to set up camp." Epitenes pointed at the soldiers who were still working, and then at his dry lips. "Look, we're dying of thirst." "Aya, you're really too." Eulipitos was so excited that he didn't know what to say. He turned to his follower and said, "Go back to the Alliance's encampment immediately and gather everyone. Go to the restaurants in the city to buy water and have them send it here. Hey, we have almost 10,000 people here. I estimate that another 10,000 people from the 5th Legion will arrive at night. It's not just the water problem. We came too fast, and the supply camp is still behind us. They'll probably only arrive tomorrow. These cold hard bread aren't enough to replenish the soldiers' energy after such a long journey. Epicthenes took out his rations and waved them in front of Olapatos, reminding him bluntly. He's joking with you. Felicius glared at Epictenes. We have bread and meat. It's enough to fill our stomachs. You don't have to worry. I can't solve the problem of food supply for so many soldiers in Sericium, but as long as you come to Kyrenia, I promise the people of Kyrenia will make sure you're well fed. While Olapatos expressed his apologies, he also subtly urged the Dionians. At the same time, he issued an order to his followers. If the eateries in the city don't have enough pulp, send word to the citizens of Cirium. As long as they send us their homemade pulp, we'll pay double the price for each bottle they send, the follower responded and left. Thank you so much. Felicius quickly stepped forward to express his gratitude. This is the messenger of Kyrenia, Eulipitos. Ansitanos quickly introduced him. Oh. Epictenes pursed his lips and thought, so you're from Kyrenia. You should pay for the water. I didn't expect you to come so soon. I didn't prepare anything. Otherwise, I would have invited you to a banquet to express my gratitude. There's no need for a banquet. Our military law doesn't allow generals and soldiers to eat and drink to their heart's content during a war. We've brought our own rations for a few days, but I'm afraid that the supply camp won't be able to supply them. If that happens, we'll really have to consider asking Kyrenia to provide us with food first. Now that he was a commander, Felicius had to consider every detail. Of course not. I'll send someone back tomorrow to inform the city hall to prepare the rations. I've just said that the people of Kyrenia will make sure that the people of Dionia are well fed. Eulipitos promised without hesitation. Looking at the countless soldiers in front of him lifting their pickaxes and digging trenches, sweating profusely, Eulipitos could not help but ask curiously, "You guys are already very tired after arriving here. You can just set up tents and rest. Why are you still digging trenches?" This is a regulation of the military law of Dionia. It's mainly to provide a safer and more comfortable camp for the soldiers, Ansitanos explained. Ansitanos explained conveniently. Since Dionia had been established for a long time, the veterans, like them, had learned some of the rules of the army. Your army is really strict. As a citizen, Eulipitos had served in the army many times. Comparing himself to the soldiers of Dionia in front of him, he couldn't help but sigh. Chapter 408. They have a long way to go, so of course they will arrive late, Felicius comforted him. Felicius consoled him. The 5th Army owes the 4th Army a favor, and they will repay it in the future. Epicthenes sneered. Commander, do you think Dracos is a grateful person? While Syracuse's army was landing in Lochley, the army led by the Devers had arrived in Picassus. Previously, he had sent a messenger to inform the governor of Picassus, Antares, that the news of the army's arrival must be strictly sealed. To this end, Antares even sent out the only 5 small warships in the port to intercept the merchant ships heading north, forcing them to dock at the port of Picassus, causing a lot of complaints. However, when the Devers arrived in Picassus, they praised Antares for his decisiveness and meticulousness, as well as his willingness to take responsibility. At this time, Antares was accompanying the Devers to inspect the city and port of Picassus. The Devers was quite satisfied with the order and construction of the entire city. He asked, "How many Dionia citizens are there in Picassus now?" "There are 4,523 official citizens, 3,351 probationary citizens, and 5,117 registered free people. That's a total of 12,991 people. The entire population of Picassus is about 53,000 people," Antares said as if he was counting his family treasures. "Oh, the population of Picassus is quite large. The Devers was a little surprised. Sir, Picassus is a big city in Lucania City that is not inferior to Grimentum and Potentia. Moreover, it is a coastal city, so it is much more attractive to the Greek freedmen than the other cities like Grimentum and Nudum, Antares said proudly. So, there are a lot of Greeks who have settled here? The Devers asked immediately. Yes. There are about 4,230 official citizens, preparatory citizens, and freedmen of Dionia, and the number is increasing every day. Most of them are Greeks from Temparia. In just 3 years, the Greeks of Picassus are almost half of the population. The Devers was shocked again, and then asked worriedly, "Do they have a lot of conflicts with the Lucanians?" "A little, but not too much," Antares said with a relaxed expression. "Because before Picassus was incorporated into Dionia, they experienced many defeat. The Lucanians in Picassus suffered heavy losses. Not only did they lose a lot of land, but most of the remaining people also lost their fighting spirit. Moreover, most of their tribes live in the mountains in the east, where they mainly graze. The Greeks here prefer the flat land near the sea, so both sides can coexist peacefully. Also, the lifestyle of the Greeks, who are mainly from Campania, is somewhat similar to that of the Lucanians. They get along quite well. It seems that you are enjoying your life here, and you are doing a good job as the governor. You know the situation of the citizens of this city very well." The Devers praised him, and at the same time, they were interested by what he said before. They asked again, "Sir Antares, can you tell me more about the characteristics of the Campanians?" "Sir, the Greeks of Campania are the most un-Greek Greeks I have seen apart from us in Dionia." Antares' words caught the attention of the Devers. "Oh, what do you mean?" Antares thought for a moment and said seriously, "I guess it's because the Greeks of Campania have always been surrounded by other races, Volsci to the north, Lucanians to the south, Simonians to the east, and Phoenicians to the west. So, on the one hand, compared to the Greeks who prefer freedom in other places, the Campanians are very united and like to work together. On the other hand, some of their habits are influenced by their neighbors. For example, they love to eat beef and mutton, and they also worship some gods that do not belong to Greece. For example, some Campanians even built Savone, the god worshipped by the Simonians, which is believed to protect them from wild beasts. In Picassus, these characteristics of the Campanians are also very obvious." The Devers smiled and said earnestly, "In our alliance, there are Greeks, Lucanians, Bruti, and now the Greeks of Campania. There may be more races joining this alliance in the future. So when dealing with conflicts between races, the first principle is tolerance, tolerance of their religion, tolerance of their habits. The second is justice, everyone and any race is equal under the law of Dionia, there can be no favoritism. The third is to guide them to like our way of life, entertainment, competitions, military training, and most importantly, religion. Hades is the protector of Dionia. Don't forget this. As time goes by, I believe that no matter who they were before, they will eventually become Dionia." Antares listened carefully, then nodded in admiration and said, "Sir Devers, you are absolutely right. I'm just talking. In fact, you are already managing this city, aren't you?" The Devers smiled self-deprecatingly. "To speed up the integration of these races, it's best to find something in common between them. During this time, I've been discussing with Ansitanos and discovered a secret." The Devers looked at Antares and saw that he was listening attentively, so he said in a more serious tone, "The god of strength, Hercules, is very famous among all the races in Italy. Some tribes even claim to be his descendants. I'm going to propose in the Senate, build a temple of Hercules in Turiae, and start a celebration for him, so that the people of all races in Dionia can celebrate this god. It's only temporarily suspended because of the outbreak of war. I think Picassus can try to do it first, what do you think?" "Sir, that's a good idea." Antares praised from the bottom of his heart. In fact, There are already several altars of Hercules in Picosus. Both the Lucanians and the Campanians have them. I will try my best to build a large temple of Hercules, and let Picosus become the center of worship for Hercules in this region. Are you trying to steal the limelight from Thurii? I'm afraid that Cunigurata will fight you to the death, the Devers said jokingly, and the two laughed. The two talked and laughed on the way back to the city hall. In this harmonious atmosphere, no one mentioned Euripus and Predes. In fact, there was no need to mention them, because it was all in the past. When they returned to the city hall, the first commander, Antonios, and the second commander, Amyntas, were already waiting there. Sir, the construction of the camp has been completed, and the soldiers have begun to rest. Antonios saw the Devers come in and immediately reported. In addition, the messenger from Legio III has sent news that Legio III is already on the way to Picosus, and they will probably arrive at dusk. Say, this Alexis actually withdrew from Potentia in fright before the Samni army. This is a disgrace to the legion of Dionysia. Amyntas sneered in dissatisfaction. If the Third Legion really fought the Samni army head-on, I'm afraid that now I can only bring the First and Second Legions with less than 20,000 people to face the Samni army of more than 40,000 people. How can we fight this war? Alexis gave up her own reputation for the sake of the overall victory of the war. This is undoubtedly a very safe approach. It should be worth learning from, especially you, Amyntas, the Devers said seriously. The encounter of Legio III in Potentia had already happened a few days ago, and the Devers had already learned the details from Antares. Amyntas was not convinced and muttered a few words, but he did not dare to speak loudly. Sir, these Samni people seem to be quite fierce. First, they set up an ambush, then they took the initiative to send their army to attack, not giving Legio III any chance to breathe. Antonios interrupted. If they know that we are preparing to attack Poseidonia, will the Samni people send their army again? It's good that the Samni people dare to come. I'm just afraid that they won't. The Devers began to carefully analyze the plan that he had been thinking about for the past few days to the three people in the living room. According to the intelligence, the Samni people have always won more than they lost when they fought the Lucanians in the past. The Campanians have also been attacked by them for many years. The Samni people must have always been very proud of their fighting ability. In addition, this is the first time the Samni people have sent out so many warriors. I'm afraid that it has fueled their arrogance. This is also thanks to the Syracuse people. As he spoke, he glanced at Antares. Antares nodded and said, "These few days, the warships patrolling our port have reported many times that a large number of Syracuse cargo ships have been spotted heading north and entering the port of Poseidonia. I think it is very likely that they are transporting food for the Samni people." Damn the Syracuse people! Amyntas cursed and shouted, "Sir, we should quickly attack Poseidonia and cut off the food supply of the Samni people before they know that we have arrived." Chapter 409. Sir, do you already have a plan? Antonio asked hurriedly. The Devers looked at the two legion commanders with sparkling eyes. From the way the Simonians treated the Legio III, their commander is a decisive person. Plus, the Simonians are more arrogant, so, the army of Syracuse worked hard for the whole night, and accidents occurred frequently. Therefore, on the second day, almost all the soldiers were resting. The camp of Syracuse's army stretched for more than 10 miles, occupying all the open space from the west of Rockley to the coast. It also cut off the north-south traffic. Although it was called a camp, it was actually a hastily built tents by the soldiers. There was not even a simple fence around the perimeter. There was no protection at all. Of course, the neighboring hostile city-states, Corunna and Taurina on the west of the mountain, had long been shocked by the huge army of Syracuse. They did not even have enough self-protection, so they did not dare to take the initiative to attack. At noon, Dionysius woke up from his deep sleep. He had just eaten breakfast and was about to discuss with his relative, Demodocus, about the deployment of troops when he received an urgent report from the guards. There were about 20,000 soldiers of the Southern Alliance in the territory of Corunna. Dionysius was shocked. His army had just arrived in Rockley, and the reinforcements of the Southern Alliance had already arrived. How could they be so fast? Unless the enemy knew that he would set off on that day, so they had made preparations in advance. But how was that possible? He had also decided to set off based on when the Simonians would attack Potentia and when the Devers of Dionia would leave Thurii. It had only been 2 days since the deployment was arranged. Although the army had already begun to gather outside the city of Syracuse, and the fleet had long been prepared, they had not moved. It was impossible for the city-states of Greece to react so quickly in such a short period of time, so he decided to find out for himself. As the tyrant of Syracuse, Dionysius was not just a manipulator behind the scenes who only knew how to play with conspiracies. He was once a hero who fought against the Carthaginian invasion. Otherwise, he would not have been the one who was placed high hopes on by the panicked people when Syracuse was in danger and eventually elected as the general. Even though he was now firmly seated on the throne of the usurper and no longer needed to personally lead the charge, he still took the lead from time to set an example. A few years ago, he led his army to attack Carthage's strategic town of Motia in Sicily. After a long time of failure, he heard from the surrendered soldiers that there was a secret passage that could lead directly to the core area of Motia. He immediately led 2,000 Suicide Squad members and crossed the steep back mountain trail in an attempt to raid the Motians. Unfortunately, he was discovered by the enemy and was besieged. Fortunately, his men came to his rescue, and with the blessing of the goddess of fortune, he was able to escape the disaster. At this moment, he quickly led his military advisor Phoebidas, the important generals of Syracuse, Phasapeses and Astagras, as well as the leader of the Namibian mercenaries, Asrita, and 500 Namibian cavalrymen, to the north. It was more than 60 miles from Lochley to Konia. Along the narrow and winding coast, the war horse trod on the somewhat messy and uneven muddy road. After 2 hours they entered Konia's territory. Then Dionysius saw the enemy cavalry patrolling ahead. Seeing their all-black attire, Dionysius, who had long studied the Greek city-state army carefully, immediately made a judgment. "It's the cavalry of Dionia." Hearing this, Phoebidas, who was also surprised at how the reinforcements of the Southern Alliance came so quickly, seemed to have an answer. For the past few years, he had been paying attention to this Greek city-state alliance that had humiliated him. He had more or less learned about the army of Dionia. This alliance, which valued military strength as much as Sparta, was indeed very different from the other Greek city-states in terms of military strength. It was possible that they could arrive quickly. The leader of the Namibian mercenaries, Achelida, hurriedly whistled a few times, and 30 Namibian cavalrymen rushed over. The 10 Dionia scouts turned and ran. The two sides began a chase, which actually allowed the Namibian cavalrymen to close the distance between them. They clamped their legs tightly on the bellies of their horses. In such a fast gallop, they did not use their hands to pull the reins. Instead, they freed their hands to grab a few javelins in their left hand and pull one out with their right hand. They leaned back slightly and threw it with all their might. More than a dozen javelins crisscrossed in the air, followed by a few screams. 3 Dionia cavalrymen were hit by the javelins and fell off their horses. Another 2 war horses were hit by the javelins. They neighed and jumped, throwing the cavalrymen on their back. In just one encounter, the 10 Dionia scouts were reduced by half, causing the remaining Dionia cavalrymen to flee desperately to the camp. The Namibians captured 2 cavalrymen alive and brought them to Dionysius. Dionysius sat high on his horse, looking down at them and said coldly, "Tell me, how many soldiers of Dionia have come? Who is leading the army? What is the battle plan in Corunna? Whoever can tell me the best and the most detailed, I'll let him go." The two Dionia captives looked at each other and did not speak. Dionysius did not have the patience to wait for the two nameless pawns to speak. He snorted coldly, "Since you won't speak, then let the Namibians send you across the Styx. Achilleta." "Sir Dionysius, I'm here." Achilleta smiled ferociously, revealing his uneven yellow teeth. His long, unkempt hair covered most of his face. He jumped off his horse and pulled out the short sword at his waist. As he approached, one of the captives began to become nervous. When Achilleta grabbed his shoulder and aimed the sharp tip of the sword at his throat, he shouted in panic, "I'll speak! I'll speak!" Achilleta looked back at Dionysius, and Dionysius nodded. He let go of the captive and waited for him to speak again. At this time, the other captive shouted loudly, "Licibulus, are you crazy? Do you want your family and children to never be able to hold their heads up high in Turiae and be despised by others? Do you want to be unable to pass the judgment of Hades after your death, and your soul to be pushed into the terrifying hell of a mountain of knives and a sea of fire? What are you waiting for?" Dionysius saw that the hesitation on the captive's face was dissipating after hearing his comrades shout, and hurriedly shouted. Achilleta immediately rushed towards the other captive with his sword. The soldier looked at the ferocious Namibian rushing towards him with a calm expression and shouted to his comrade, "I'll wait for you at Elysee." The sharp sword cut his neck, and blood gushed out like a fountain, but he did not cry out in pain. He gritted his teeth and finally fell straight down. Licibulus looked sorrowful, but his eyes became determined. He closed his eyes, straightened his chest, and shouted loudly, "Come, give me a sword! My name will be on the Hall of Martyrs." Achilleta looked at Dionysius again. Dionysius was inexplicably irritated. He waved his hand forcefully, and then urged his horse forward. Phoebidas watched the captive be executed, and only then did he catch up with them on horseback. At the same time, he sighed and said, "What two warriors! If the soldiers of Dionia were like them, this war would be difficult to fight." One had to know that in the war between the Greek city-states, both sides were mostly ordinary citizen soldiers. Once the war was unfavorable, it was very easy for them to flee, and it was common for them to surrender after being captured. It was rare for Leonidas to lead 300 Sparta soldiers to defend Hot Spring Gate and eventually die in battle. Now, in addition to Sparta, there was also Dionia. How could Phoebidas not be shocked? That Devers bragged that he was Hades's chosen one, and these stupid Greeks actually believed him, said Dionysius angrily. He then emphasized, "The outcome of a war is decided by strength. A fake chosen one won't change the outcome of a war." Phoebidas did not say anything, but he was feeling uneasy. "Commander, our legion has been marching since yesterday, and we've been building our camp at night. We've been rushing to Corunna this morning, and we haven't had much rest yet. Can we just build the trenches and barricades today, let our brothers have a good sleep, and finish the camp tomorrow?" Epiphanes asked Felicius. Felicius was a little hesitant. Of course, he could see the fatigue of the soldiers, but they were now at the front line of the battlefield, and Syracuse's army could arrive at any time. According to the military law of Dionia, they had to speed up the construction of a sturdy camp. So he turned to the 5th Corps commander, Dracos, who was sitting on the other side, and asked, "What do you think?" Of course, Dracos answered without hesitation, "No matter how tired we are, we have to let the soldiers build the camp according to the military law, and rest well at night. If your legion wants to continue, you can do it yourselves. Our legion spent the whole night digging a camp for you, so of course we're more tired than you." Epiphanes glanced at Dracos and said with dissatisfaction, All right. Felicius quickly tried to smooth things over. "Our brothers are indeed tired," but, while Felicius was considering how to express his decision in a more tactful manner, he saw Sabokos, the captain of the cavalry, rushing over. Chapter 410. Sabokos, what happened? Felicius asked when he saw the serious look on Saboko's face. Commander. Sabokos, who was already in his 50s, was still agile and had a loud voice. He saluted without hesitation. My scouts have reported that there are about 500 cavalrymen coming from the south. They're approaching the camp. Are they from Syracuse? Felicius asked in a low voice. I think so. Those cavalrymen don't have any protection, and they're good at throwing javelins. They're very different from the Greek cavalrymen, Sabokos answered seriously. Then what are you waiting for? Send out your cavalrymen and chase these Syracuse people away. Don't let them interfere with the construction of the camp, Dracos said immediately. Sabokos was a little embarrassed. He said in a low voice, Our cavalrymen might not be their match. According to the scouts, they're very good at controlling their horses, and their javelins are also very accurate. 10 of our cavalrymen were chased by them, and when they were 50 meters away, they managed to close the distance. They threw a round of javelins, and we lost 5 of our men. Are the Syracuse cavalrymen that strong? Epicthenes was a little surprised. He knew the strength of the Dionia cavalrymen. Due to regular training, he felt that they were much stronger than the cavalrymen of the Greek city-states in terms of horsemanship, combat skills, and tactical execution. They might be the cavalrymen hired by Syracuse. When Syracuse fought against Carthage, it's said that they hired Celtic and Namibian cavalrymen. They're all races that grew up on horseback, so it's normal that they're better at horsemanship than us. Master Devers even reminded me before I came, Felicius said with a serious expression. Then let's send our 5th Corps light infantry and Sabko's cavalry out to chase away these cavalrymen. Dracos made a prompt decision and suggested. Felicius nodded in agreement. Dionysius continued to lead his men forward. When they were about to reach the city of Carunia, they saw a magnificent sight hundreds of meters away. Thousands of men were digging trenches, moving soil, and building barricades on the vast, flat land. Some were building wooden fences and watchtowers. Everybody was busy, but everything seemed to be in order. This was not the only construction site in front of them. It kept extending to the east and west, and seemed to be blocking the passage to the coast on this side of the mountain range. Dionysius, Phoebidas, Phasapeses, and Astagras fell silent. After a while, Dionysius pointed at the Dionia camp that was under construction and said to Phasapeses and Astagras in a reproachful tone, Look at them, and then look at the army you're leading. Phasapeses and Astagras were ashamed. They understood what Dionysius meant. Both of them had arrived in a hurry, but the Dionia could work hard to build their camp despite their fatigue, while the camp of Syracuse's army could not be called a camp at all. It was disorderly and messy, and the soldiers slept peacefully in the tents that were built carelessly. Sir, the Dionia army is building their camp to defend against our attack. No one dares to attack our army, so, just as Astagras was about to explain, he was interrupted by Dionysius. So your army can sleep peacefully and wait for the Greeks to surrender. Dionysius was furious because he had been learning from the Dionysian army's strengths based on the information he received from Dionia over the past few years. On the other hand, the problems that arose during the battle between Syracuse and Carthage prompted him to reform the Syracuse army. He clearly divided the heavy infantry, cavalry, siege troops, and navy into separate units. They would fight together under a unified and effective command. To allow the generals and soldiers to master the new tactics, he also learned from Dionia and increased the number of military training sessions for the citizens. He also formulated stricter military rules to ensure that the army could carry out the new rules. After this reform, Syracuse always had the upper hand in the Second War against Carthage. However, the scene in front of him made him feel the gap between his army and the Dionia soldiers in terms of willpower and order execution. Therefore, this anger originated from his jealousy and anxiety. Astagras was just a tool for him to vent his anger. This was indeed a little unfair to Astagras, But when he wanted to defend himself with a few words, another important general of Syracuse, Phasapeses, secretly tugged at his clothes and said respectfully, "Sir, don't worry, we'll go back and gather the army and let them rebuild the camp." Only then did Dionysius's expression lighten a little. At this time, the leader of the Namibian mercenaries, Akelida, stepped forward and said, as if to claim credit, "Sir, the enemy is now building their camp. It's a good opportunity for a sneak attack. Let me lead my people over and fight for a while." Before Dionysius could answer, Phoebidas, who had been closely observing the Dionia camp, said, "Don't rush, the army of Dionia is coming." A few squads of cavalry and infantrymen rushed out of the tunnels left by the Dionysia camp that was under construction. They quickly got into formation in front of the camp, with cavalry on both sides and light infantrymen in the middle. Then, they marched towards Dionysius and the others without hesitation. It's useless no matter how many Dionia soldiers there are. "Sir, please allow me to lead my people to attack. I'll let my warriors go around their flank first, attack their cavalry, and disrupt their formation. Then, we'll take advantage of the chaos to attack the light infantry in the middle and let them have a taste of the power of the Namibian cavalry." "We should go back," Phoebidas suddenly said, a little panic in his voice. Dionysius looked at him in surprise. It was the first time he saw the indifferent and straightforward Sparta man lose his composure since they set off from Syracuse. However, as the commander of the army, he had more important things to do. There was no need to tangle with the enemy's small troops at this time. So, he listened to Phoebidas and ordered the retreat. Although Akelida was unruly, he was still full of respect for his employer who did not show his emotions. He reluctantly called back the eager Namibian cavalry and followed behind Dionysius. When Felicius learned of the enemy's retreat, he said to the two commanders seriously, "You've seen it, the army of Syracuse will attack soon. We must build the camp as soon as possible." This time, Epicthenes had no objections. On the way back to Locri, Dionysius asked, "Phoebidas, now that the Dionia have built a camp in Corunna, it's obvious that they're trying to defend against our attack from the north. What do you think we should do next? We must not let the Dionia build a strong camp here and use the narrow terrain to offset our advantage in numbers, thus wasting our time. We must invade the territory of Trine and Silatina as soon as possible. The terrain there is wide and conducive for our army to fight. We can force them to fight us head-on, then defeat them and occupy their cities. This way, the Dionia will have no helpers, and the main force is still trapped in Potentia. It's a good opportunity for us to destroy them." When he said the last sentence, Phoebidas's expression was even a little ferocious. Dionysius looked at him curiously. Although he did not understand why Phoebidas suddenly had a bad impression of the Dionia, this was exactly what he wanted. Therefore, after thinking for a long time, he made up his mind. He summoned the commanders and gave an order in a low voice, "Astagras, Phasapeses, go back and immediately reorganize the army. Tomorrow. I want to attack Corunna and Trine tomorrow." "Yes, sir." Phoebidas listened to their conversation and was happy to see that Dionysius had arranged according to his suggestion. However, his mind was still replaying the scene he saw just now. Be it the cavalry or the light infantry, the Dionia were all dressed in black. He could even vaguely see the same pattern on the leather shields of their cavalry. Although he did not see the heavy infantry of Dionia, since the light infantry and cavalry were the same, the heavy infantry's attire must be quite uniform. Dionysius had received detailed information about the Dionysian army in advance, so he was not too surprised. But for the Sparta Phoebidas, through the uniform of the Dionia and the oppressive black, he saw something deeper. When the citizens of Athens, Corinth, Thebes, and other city-states showed off their rich and colorful artistic taste and entertainment, and even painted all kinds of exquisite patterns on their dusty round shields to show off their personality and taste, the Sparta soldiers were secretly laughing. because since the regent of Sparta came to Cugu to carry out the reform, they had been trained under whips and sticks since childhood. After 100 years of war, they had already summed up the essence of war, which was to not care about any means, only for the final victory. The Sparta claimed to be the descendants of Hercules, but in fact they worshipped wolves more. Their army fought like a pack of wolves, emphasizing discipline, unity, and psychological deterrence. Even if each of them was strong in combat, they would never allow anyone to fight alone. Chapter 4:11. When the trumpeters blew their high-pitched whistles, and the Sparta soldiers sang their praises to the ancient heroes and charged at them in unison, these Greek city-state soldiers would often have a mental breakdown. They would turn around and flee before the battle started, unwilling to take the risk of fighting against Sparta. The Spartans relied on the terrifying atmosphere and bloody massacres that they created on the battlefield through the unity of their army to intimidate the other city-states in Greece for hundreds of years. Syracuse's large army did not make Phoebidas feel uneasy in the past, but the Dionysian army's tenacious obedience and uniform triggered fear in his heart. He seemed to see another Sparta army. Although they wore black instead of red, they had much more soldiers than Sparta. The Mediterranean Sea only needs one Sparta. Phoebidas thought intensely. Legio III led by Alexis had just arrived at Picassus. The Devers did not even have time to exchange pleasantries with him. Instead, they directly told him about their battle plan. After getting his approval, they immediately ordered him to lead Legio III north to attack Poseidonia. The coastal area from Picassus to Poseidonia was not as flat as the southern coast from Thurii to Crotone, and then to Rockley. It was mostly mountains, hilly areas, and the ground was rugged and uneven. The Legio III had to pass through Elea on their arduous march. As a city-state of the Dionia alliance, the chief general of Elea, Canios, did not hesitate when he received the news. He personally gathered 1,500 public militia and then joined the ranks of Legio III. After all, after the Samni occupied Poseidonia, Elea was directly under the fierce Samni army. The people of Elea hoped that Dionia could repel the wolves from the north and restore peace to Elea. Half a day after Legio III left, the Devers led the 1st and 2nd legions north. Picassus's chief executive, Antares, was not idle either. He had to help prepare the supplies for the 30,000 soldiers. The food consumption of such a large army must be astonishing. Picassus alone could not satisfy them. Fortunately, Dionia had built a granary in the Grimentum, which could temporarily meet the needs of such a large number of people for a short period of time. If the battle dragged on, they would have to use Cosenza's granary. This was also the reason why the Devers had to speed up their operation. Antares also had to prepare carts and manpower to transport the rations and supplies to the Devers' frontline camp under the command and leadership of the army's logistics camp. This was supposed to be a complicated task that required a lot of manpower, but under the operation of the experienced logistics camp, with the help of the capable Antares, and with the active cooperation of the Grimentum administrator Bagul, everything went smoothly. In the afternoon, after the Legio III rendezvoused with the Elea army, they turned to the northeast and prepared to go around the wide mountain range on the northern coast of Elea. Poseidonia was just north of the mountain range. Halfway through the journey, the 3rd Legion stopped and began to build a camp. They made a lot of noise and were easily discovered by the spies of the Samni. What did you say? The Dionia appeared south of the Stella Mountains and set up camp on the banks of the Alento River? The Pentine leader, Piccini, who was in the mansion of the Duke of Poseidonia and was eating delicacies, was shocked. Yes, leader. They have more than 10,000 people. And we quietly approached their camp and found that they raised a flag with the words Legio III written on it. The scouts' anxious words were mixed with a hint of pride. Dionia's Legio III. Shouldn't they be in the Grimentum? Why are they here? Piccini had lost his appetite. He threw the mutton in his hand that he had just eaten a few mouthfuls on the table. He lowered his head and wiped the grease off his mouth on his already dirty leather robe. I think the Dionia must have heard that Poseidonia has been conquered by us. That's why they came in a hurry to take it back, the other leader, Mobk, guessed. Dionia sent 10,000 people, and we only have 3,000 soldiers. And they came so quickly. The parts of Poseidonia that were destroyed by our ballistae have not been repaired yet. How can we defend against their attack? Piccini paced back and forth in the room in frustration. So we have to send people to Potentia immediately and ask for help from the leader. Mobk reminded. Of course. And immediately inform the soldiers. No matter how late they work tonight, they have to repair the holes in the wall. Piccini slammed his fist on the wooden table. At dusk, Alexis sent out all the members of the reconnaissance team to chase away and kill the Samanai spies in the surrounding area. At night, the Devers led an army of 20,000 and quietly entered the city of Elia. The Elysians, who had been informed by Alexis in advance, had already vacated the place for the Dionysian army to stay. On the same day, in Lochley, Syracuse's army finally assembled. The report from the cavalry surprised Dionysius and the others. In just a day and a half, the Dionia camp had already begun to take shape. This news made him even more determined to carry out his new plan, to divide the army into two parts. The 20,000 soldiers under the command of the Fascipeses would join forces with the 10,000 soldiers in Lochley. A total of 40,000 soldiers would attempt to attack the Dionia camp in order to contain them. As for himself, he would personally lead more than 50,000 soldiers through the ancient road between the mountains to the west coast of Greece, then turn north, in order to prevent dragging down the speed of the march. Dionysius's army did not bring a large number of supplies. Instead, he let the ships in Lochley carry a full load of supplies and set off from the port. They went south around the Strait of Messina, then along the west coast of Greece, heading north to accompany the army on land. When the people of Lygum saw the continuous stream of Syracuse ships sailing across the sea in the distance, one could imagine the fear in their hearts. Some even shouted in panic, "The Syracuse people are coming! They are going to land!" Later, it turned out to be a false alarm, but it did cause a lot of panic in the people of Lygum. There were even many members of the council who requested that the troops in Taurina be transferred back to defend against the landing attack of the Syracuse people. Attilius had no idea what to do at the moment, so he immediately sent messengers to Taurina. Phaedon, who was in Taurina, first received a report from the scouts. They found that the Syracuse army had passed through the ancient road between the mountains and was advancing towards Medma. As the vanguard, the cavalry had passed through the city of Medma and were still moving forward. Then, there was another urgent report from the port lighthouse. They found that the Syracuse fleet, consisting of thousands of cargo ships, had passed through Taurina and were sailing north. An hour later, a merchant ship from Lygum that hurried into the port of Taurina from the north reported that the Syracuse fleet did not enter Medma but continued north. It seems that Syracuse is preparing to attack Trine from the north. We are safe for now. The general in charge of the army in Taurina, Krylotas, heaved a sigh of relief. However, Phaedon's expression did not relax. He said with a gloomy expression, "If the southern alliance in the north is defeated, it is only a matter of time before Lygum and Taurina are attacked. Then it depends on whether our alliance can withstand the attack of Syracuse, or even defeat them." Krylotas' thoughts were evoked by Phaedon's words. He said with some hope, but then he seemed to feel that the hope was a little slim. He sighed and said, "Unfortunately, the consul Devers of Dionia led his main force to defend against the Simonians. If he can lead his troops back in time, the alliance's chances of winning will increase by a lot. So we can't let the Syracuse people attack so easily," Phaedon said loudly with a serious expression. Krylotas was shocked. In the afternoon, the messengers from Lygum arrived at Taurina and sternly requested Phaedon to lead his troops back. Phaedon deliberately stalled for time while urgently sending his men back to Lygum. By dusk, Phaedon was still unable to gather his soldiers. In the end, he used the reason that it was too dark to march to postpone it until the next day. Early the next morning, Attilius, who discovered that the Syracuse fleet had already left Taurina and did not attack Lygum, cancelled the order to recall his troops at the request of Phaedon's men. His men quickly returned to Taurina with his urgent letter, and only then did they stop the pointless march of Lygum's troops. But that was for another time. On this day, in order to speed up the march of the huge mixed army of Syracuse, Dionysius thought of many ways. The most effective one was to send someone to each army to announce that whoever arrived in Hyrnion first would be allowed to enter the enemy's city first after conquering the enemy's city, and the last army to arrive would not have the right to share the spoils of war. Dionysius's troops weren't as disciplined as the Dionysian army. Because of the large number of mercenaries, in order to maintain high morale, his troops often burned, killed, and looted after conquering the city. It was like this in Moesia, and it was the same in Catanae and Naxos in the Greek city-states of Sicily. In fact, the destruction that Syracuse caused to the Greek city-states of Sicily was no less than that of Carthage. This was also the reason why the Greeks of Sicily feared and hated Dionysius at the same time. Chapter 4:12. By dusk, the vanguard of Syracuse had actually arrived at Hyrnion. It was 100 miles from Lochley to Hyrnion via Medmar. Dionysius's army had used more than a day to march and complete the journey. It was a miracle. The commotion caused by the arrival of the Syracuse army had alerted the Trine scouts, who had been keeping a close eye on Hyrnion. They quickly returned to the city of Trine on the northern bank of the Ramato River, more than 50 miles away from Hyrnion. The Syracuse army had arrived. The shocking news shook the entire Trine city. Both civilians and members of the council were shocked. They had never imagined that the Syracuse army would approach Trine on the third day after they landed. According to the Southern Alliance's initial plan, Crotone's troops, who were the main force defending the Ramato River, had yet to arrive, and the Syrian Empire had only sent a few thousand citizen soldiers to guard the upper reaches of the Ramato River. The Ramato River's defensive line had yet to be established, and it could be said to be riddled with holes. If the Syracuse army launched an attack tomorrow, they would easily break through the Ramato River and enter the Euphemia Plains. Trine would be the first to suffer the flames of war. The Trine Council had no time to argue due to the urgency of the situation. Under the leadership of Chief General Cypros, who had been elected last year, they quickly made a decision. First, send someone to Crotone and urge them to send their main force to the Ramato River as soon as possible. Second, send someone to Sirius and request for the defense of the Ramato River with all their might. Third, send someone to Canopetia and request for help from Dionia. Fourth, send someone to Carunia and request for the 4th and 5th legions of Dionia to send reinforcement. Cypros, who had always admired Dionia, trusted the well-trained Dionia troops more than the Sirius and Crotone militia. Therefore, half of the emergency measures taken by Trine were related to Dionia. On this day, the soldiers outside the Dionia's camp continued to work hard on perfecting their defenses. However, as the scouts returned, the alarm of the camp was sounded. The soldiers immediately picked up their pickaxes, shovels, wooden baskets, and other equipment. They quickly returned to the camp and closed the gate. Syracuse is finally attacking. Dracos excitedly put on his armor with the help of the guards as he asked his adjutant, "Any instructions from Felicius?" "Let us defend ourselves," the adjutant replied. "At least you're tactful." Dracos mumbled to himself. He put on the purple crown helmet that symbolized his identity as a legion commander and tightened the earmuffs on his cheek. "Let's go and see how powerful Syracuse is." The 4th and 5th legions of Dionia had actually built two camps. Legio IV was in the west, and Legio V was in the east. The two camps were connected by a tunnel. Therefore, the allied forces of Syracuse and Rockley had divided their forces into two for ease of command. The Phasapeses would lead the Syracuse army to attack the east camp, while the general of Rockley, Diapantos, would lead the army to attack the west camp. Due to the lack of time, Syracuse did not build any siege towers. They did not even prepare many scaling ladders. However, Diapantos still had the confidence to turn the probe into a forceful attack. He wanted to repay the humiliation of being forced to retreat by the Dionysian army a few years ago in Crotone. The 20,000 troops of Rockley advanced slowly under the lead of the rhythmic sound of the horns. When they were about 500 meters away from Dionysia's camp, Diapantos raised his arm high and the sound of the horns stopped. The troops stopped advancing one after another and their formation became uneven. "Push the ballistae!" Diapantos ordered loudly. Yes, he was relying on the siege weapon brought by the Syracuse people, the ballista. The Legion of Dionysia had been busy the whole day yesterday, but they had only dug trenches and built earth ramparts and wooden fences. They did not have time to set up traps outside the camp. They did not even have time to set up the abatis. The engineers and craftsmen of the engineering battalion were still racing against time to build the sentry towers. When the first sentry tower was built, Felicius and Epicthenes immediately climbed up the tower and looked out. They saw the Rockley soldiers pushing a dozen ballistae out from the camp. Epicthenes was not surprised at all. 10 ballistae that were a size smaller than the Syracuse ballistae were placed neatly in the camp below the sentry tower. He frowned and pointed to the front. He turned around and asked the young man on the sentry tower, "Curtorod, do you think our ballistae can destroy them?" Curtorod was from the mathematics faculty of the Dionia Academy. According to the newly revised military law of Dionia 2 years ago, every legion was required to be equipped with 10 ballistae. Excellent students from the Dionia Academy had to be the spotter because they could quickly calculate the appropriate landing point based on the parabolic equation to improve the accuracy of the ballistae. Although Curtorod had participated in military training many times, it was his first time on the battlefield. Looking at the densely packed enemies in the distance, he was a little nervous. It's too far. I'm afraid it'll be very difficult." Felicius patted him on the shoulder and comforted him. "Relax, young man. It's normal to be nervous on your first battlefield. Don't worry, no matter how many enemies there are, our brave legion will drive them away." Curtorod nodded. He swallowed his saliva and looked at the front again. Then he summoned up his courage and said, I suggest that we let the enemy get closer. That way, the power of our ballista can be maximized." "Just as I thought," Epicthenes praised while looking at the handsome young man seriously. His eyes flashed with a strange light. "You're not bad, young man." Felicius saw this and coughed a few times. At this time, the messenger of the 5th Legion rushed to the sentry tower. Commander Dracos has requested to wait until the enemies are 200 meters away before firing the ballistae. We don't want to scare them away." 200 meters. Epicthenes shrugged. "This Dracos is really greedy. He thinks the same as us." Felicius laughed. As the squad leader, Ephiart and his teammates stood behind the earthen rampart, watching the huge stone bullets whizzing from the front of the enemy's formation and smashing into the camp with a loud bang, raising a layer of dust. They did not show much unease because they had practiced with the ballista unit countless times during their usual military training. They were quite familiar with this amazing long-range weapon. Therefore, even though the enemy's ballista had caused a huge commotion outside the camp, the soldiers still had the mood to joke around. They asked Epicthenes about the details of attending Hera's celebration. They were envious of the special treatment the newlyweds enjoyed during the celebration. They all said that when they got married, they would definitely go to Thurii to attend Hera's celebration. As the enemy's formation gradually approached, the point of impact of the ballistae also kept moving forward. When the stone bullets fell from the sky and smashed in front of the camp and into the trench, the platoon leaders of the legion ordered, "Cover against the wall." Just as Epicthenes and his teammates were leaning against the earthen rampart and crouching down, Kurtarad's voice came from the sentry tower. 250 meters. No rush, no rush. Epicthenes crossed his arms in front of his chest and patted his shoulder, trying to suppress his rising excitement. Bang! A stone bullet hit the wooden fence. The broken pieces of wood fell on the heavily armed soldiers, but did not cause any damage. Whoosh! A few more stone bullets whizzed over the wooden fence and fell into the camp, smashing a few tents. There were a few cries of sorrow and laughter. Kurtarad stared at the ground in front of him from the sentry tower. Yesterday, while the soldiers were busy building the camp, the ballistae did not stay idle. They had carried out mapping of the ground outside the camp and left some marks. These marks could be a weed that had been transplanted, a strange rock, or a wooden stick that was stuck at an angle. 200 meters! Kurtarad shouted excitedly. You can fire now. Epicthenes waved his hand. 30 degrees of elevation, medium stone bullets, fully loaded. Kurtarad quickly reported the data. The ballista captain, who had been listening, immediately repeated Kurtarad's words. The soldiers quickly turned the pulley, pulled the bowstring, hooked it with an iron hook, and put the 6-kilogram stone bullets into the smoothbore. After several years of further research and improvement on ballistae, Dionia's ballistae were divided into two types. One was the siege ballista, which was large in size and could fire over 20 kilograms of stone bullet. Their main targets were the city walls and buildings. The other type was the defensive ballista, which was small in size, light in weight, and had good accuracy. It could be carried by 2 or 3 people. The stone bullets it fired ranged from 3 kilograms to 10 kilograms. Their targets were the army and siege weapons. Since it was not a full-scale battle, the enemy's formation was relatively loose. However, the 20,000 soldiers were still densely packed. Therefore, they had to seize the best opportunity in the first round of attack. For this reason, Kurtarad set the landing point of the ballista at the center of the enemy's formation. Fire! The ballista captain waved his right arm. Diapantos watched as the rocks whizzed into the Dionysian camp, and he felt a sense of joy in his heart. Chapter 4:13. As for the rumor that Dionia also possessed ballistae, he did not believe it. Even Locri, which had been established for hundreds of years, could not create such a powerful siege weapon. How could the Dionia alliance, which had only been established for less than 6 years, have won? The Dionia Legio IV used ballistae to attack Napatisha. Due to its remote location, not many people knew about it. The Trine people knew about it, but under the request of the Dionia, they tried their best to keep it a secret. Closer! Closer! Diapantos excitedly urged the Syracuse soldiers to move the ballistae forward. For this reason, the entire army moved forward as well. He wanted the ballistae to be more accurate. He wanted to smash the walls that the Dionia people had worked so hard to build so that they would have nowhere to hide. He wanted to see them hide in panic under the bombardment of the stone bullets, or be forced to leave the camp and come out to fight. Although Dionysius had ordered the Phasapeses and him to restrain the Dionysian army of Corunna, if there was a good opportunity, Diapantos would not mind defeating them. He wanted to break the undefeated record of the Dionysian army in Greece and gain more glory for himself. Looking at the Syracuse gunners loading the heavy stone bullets into the barrels, Diapantos looked at the Dionia camp expectantly. Then, he was surprised to see 10 black dots flying out from the enemy's camp and landing in the middle of Locri's formation. Ballistae! Diapantos' soul almost left his body. Following his exclamation, countless screams came from the army. Because the stone pellets fell in a wide arc, the killing power was actually not that great. However, the effect was too shocking. The hands that came into contact with it were broken, the legs that came into contact with it were broken, and the head that came into contact with it was flattened. If a round shield was used to block it, the shield would break and the person would die. How could the soldiers of Locri, who had never been attacked by ballistae, not feel fear in their hearts. Their morale dropped by half. While the army was panicking, the second wave of stone bullets from Dionia arrived. The soldiers of Lochry dodged in panic, and the entire formation was in chaos. Retreat! Retreat now! The stone bullets continued to fall. One landed near Diapantos. He was so frightened that he could not care less about the Syracuse ballistae in front of him and hurriedly gave the order. However, when the bugle sounded, the east, west, and south gates of Dionia's west camp suddenly opened at the same time. The well-prepared soldiers rushed out in an orderly manner. The cavalry charged at the front, followed by the light infantry, light armor, and finally the heavy infantry. Although they could not catch the enemy, they could still hold the front line and prevent the enemy from counterattacking. Lochly's army, whose morale was low due to the relentless bombardment of stone bombs, was retreating in disarray. When Diapantos saw the entire army of Dionysia charging towards them in a black mass, due to the color of their weapons and equipment, even if he had the intention to retaliate, he had already lost control of his army. The soldiers had also lost the courage to fight as they scrambled to retreat. Determined to avenge his comrades, Soberkos led the cavalry and caught up to the enemy from the outside. The Dionia cavalry did not use their spears. Instead, they drove their horses forward, causing the scattered soldiers to be even more disorganized and unable to regroup. After the 1,000 cavalrymen crushed the enemy for a while, the war horse instinctively slowed down. Soberkos saw that the fleeing soldiers in front of him were thinning. He raised his spear and drew circles in the air. "Drive them to the east!" Soberkos shouted. Under his command, the cavalry began to split to the left and right, drawing an arc to drive the fleeing soldiers to the east. The light infantry and light armor also cooperated with the cavalry. Most of the fleeing soldiers were like headless flies. Under the intentional command of the Dionia soldiers, they could not distinguish between north, south, east, and west. They only ran in the direction that was the least pressured. At this time, the Syracuse troops outside the east camp were also bombarded by Dionia's ballistae. However, the experienced Syracuse soldiers did not panic. They quickly stabilized their position and retreated for a distance before retaliating with their ballistae. Both sides were in a stalemate. The fleeing soldiers of Lochly surged forward like a tidal wave, instantly disrupting the left flank of the Syracuse soldiers. Dracos, who was in the camp, would not let go of such a golden opportunity. He immediately ordered, "All troops attack." The soldiers of the 5th Legion quickly rushed out of the camp. Fasipizas saw that the situation was not good. He decisively ordered, "Retreat." The Syracuse troops quickly retreated. At the same time, they tried their best to maintain an orderly formation, roughly squeezing the fleeing soldiers of Lochly behind them. The Dionia cavalry and the soldiers of the 4th Legion chased for 5 to 6 miles until a large group of enemy cavalry caught up to them. Only then did Epithenes order his troops to retreat. He had a deep impression of the ferocious cavalry of Syracuse, and was worried that the exhausted and scattered soldiers would be at a disadvantage. In fact, the Syracuse cavalry and the mercenary cavalry had already followed Dionysius to Hyhernion. It was only the Lochly cavalry that appeared here. Under Dracos's supervision, the 5th Legion, who did not have the help of cavalry, only blew the horn to retreat after the light armor soldiers, who were the most adept at running, had their legs jelly. On the way back to the city, the defeated Diapantos met Fasipizas, who was in a bad mood due to his first defeat, and received a scolding from the latter. This was the first time Dionia's ballista was used in a field battle, and it caught the Syracuse coalition unprepared. The ballista itself did not kill more than a few dozen people, but it caused panic in the Lochly army, creating the conditions for Dionia's Legio IV to launch a surprise attack. Legio IV's surprise attack and subsequent experienced driving of the fleeing soldiers caused the Syracuse coalition to retreat. In this battle, the Syracuse coalition suffered more than 1,000 casualties, including more than 500 who were captured. Most of them were Lochley soldiers. For Dionia's southern troops, this was a significant victory. Assists was shocked when he received an urgent request for help from Trine late at night. The reason why Assists could become the acting governor of Canopitia was because the Devers had rich administrative experience in the Lucania Mountains and rich military experience, and that Assists was suitable to be the governor of Canopitia, a city on the southern border of Dionia. As he was not a senator, he could only serve as the acting governor. However, with the experience of serving as the city's governor, Assists would be elected to the Senate next year. After Assists took office, he used the experience he learned in Lucania municipality to effectively ease the racial conflict between the Brudi and the New Greeks in Canopitia. He also used Canopitia's geographical location to develop trade with Trine and other Southern Alliance states, improving the poor living conditions of the Canopitians. This made Canopitia's political situation stable, and he did not disappoint the Devers' expectations. At this time, the news that Syracuse had approached Trine in such a short time made him very uneasy. He had a better understanding of the Southern Alliance's battle plan. Trine, Crotone, and Siltine would work together to defend the West Coast Passage and prevent Syracuse's army from invading the Southern Alliance's territory. This was to buy time for Dionia's main forces to rush back. Originally, Assists estimated that Crotone, Siltine, and Trine had a total of more than 30,000 citizen soldiers. With the natural barrier of the Lamato River, which was wide and deep, it should not be a problem for them to hold out for 10 to 20 days. Moreover, if the situation became tense in the later stages, the reserve soldiers in the Brudi region could provide timely assistance. However, he did not expect Syracuse's army to arrive so quickly. It was far faster than most of the Greek city-states' armies could mobilize, assemble, and march. Of course, Syracuse's army had already been mobilized and assembled. However, the fact that such a large army was able to arrive at Trine in 3 days was enough to show that the dictator of Sicily, Dionysius, was fully prepared and determined for this war. Should he send reinforcements? The reason why Assists hesitated was because the Devers personally wrote him a letter a few days ago. In the letter, they repeatedly reminded him to strengthen the city's defenses. Once Syracuse broke through the defensive line, he must do everything possible to defend Canopitia and not let Syracuse step into Brudi territory. However, Trine and Dionia had a close relationship. Not to mention their firm support for Dionia in the Southern Alliance, Canopitia and Trine were very close to each other and had frequent trade exchanges. Their relationship was very good. If he did not help them, he was afraid that it would destroy the good impression the Trine people had of Dionia. It would also destroy the good business that the Dionia alliance had worked hard to establish in Greece over the past few years. After thinking about it, Assists finally made up his mind. He made a promise to the Trine emissary. In the name of Hades, he would personally lead Canopiticia's reinforcements to Trine first thing in the morning. After sending away the grateful emissary, Assists decided to write a letter to Helos, who had just been appointed as the chief executive of Cosenza. He told him about the new movements of Syracuse's army and his own concerns. He also asked for reinforcements. He believed that the former captain of the Devers would make the right choice. After writing, he immediately set off with the letter and rushed to Cosenza under the starry night. Then, he called the patrol captain who had just fallen asleep and asked him to inform the reserve soldiers of the 5th Legion to gather at the square the next morning. After doing all this, Assists returned to his bedroom, exhausted both physically and mentally. Chapter 4:14. Tina, Syracuse's army is approaching Trine. I don't think the Southern Alliance's army will be able to stop them at the north bank of the Ramato River, Assists said honestly. Then, doesn't that mean that the Canopitia we're in is in danger? Tina was shocked. Assists did not answer. He sat on the bed and hugged his wife. Is the child asleep? Mza has taken him to sleep. Tina pointed at the bedroom beside them. Assists hesitated for a moment before saying, "Bring the child to Cosenza tomorrow." Tina's eyes widened and she shouted, "I'm not going! I'm the daughter of Senator Vespa. My brother is the governor of Grimentum. I'm also the wife of the governor of Canopitia. The people of Canopitia are defending against Syracuse's invasion. If I leave with the child, what will the people here think? Will they still listen to your commands?" Assists was stunned for a moment. He hugged his wife tightly and gritted his teeth. "You're right. I was too busy thinking about the safety of you and the child that I forgot about this. My whole family is here, all of us." Tina comforted her husband. "With Hades's protection, Canopitia will be able to hold on. And when Master Devers returns, Syracuse will definitely be chased away." Assists looked at his wife. He did not expect her to be more confident in this war than him. He just did not know how Master Devers was doing in Lucania. The messengers sent by the Samni army stationed in Poseidonia spent the whole afternoon and night on their journey. They finally arrived at the Samni camp not far from the city of Poseidonia in the wee hours of the morning. "What did you say? Dionia has surrounded Poseidonia." Torlek, the Pentine leader, could not sit still when he heard the news. After all, he had left 3,000 Pentine warriors in Poseidonia. "Did you find out? Which Dionia unit is it?" Vilan, the leader of Hilpini, asked the messenger carefully. "It's Dionia's Legio III, we're sure. And when they were building the camp, the soldiers were shouting in Lucanian," the messenger replied confidently. Vilani knew that the 3rd Legion of the Dionians was mainly made up of Lucanians. After hearing the messenger's words, he was relieved. It had only been less than 10 days since he led his army to invade the Potentian territory. Based on his years of experience fighting the Greeks in Campania, the Dionians needed to mobilize the citizens in Turiae, gather the troops, prepare the supplies, and then lead the army through the rugged Lucanian mountains. It would take at least half a month for them to arrive here. It was just like how they had been mobilizing and preparing since they reached an agreement with the Syracusa people 2 months ago. That was why they had such a huge force today. "How many of them?" Torlek asked. "Including Elia's army, the total number is more than 10,000. Vilan." Torlek looked at Hilpini. Vilan looked at Torlek's piercing gaze. Of course, he knew what Pentni wanted to say. At this time, Vilan interrupted loudly, "This Dionia's Legio III is quite fast. Father, it was not easy for Uncle Torlek to return with his army. With Syracuse's ballistae, we might be able to take down Grimentum if we attack with all our might tomorrow." Vilan became more anxious as he spoke. "The cunning Dionia doesn't dare to fight us head-on. They want to disrupt our plan by attacking Poseidonia." "We can't," Vilan interrupted him loudly. "Poseidonia has stored a large amount of food for our army. It's very important to us. We can't let Dionia take it. We have to save Poseidonia." Vilan's words calmed Torlek down a little. "Vilan, I will lead my warriors to save Pitni and the rest." He stood up and prepared to leave. "Don't worry, Torlek." Vilan turned to look at the leader of Caltini's army. "The Dionia's Legio III is a slippery fish. I'm afraid they will run away again and cause us more trouble. Leader Quinduink, can you lead the warriors of Caltini and the warriors of Pentni to capture this fish and destroy it along with the reinforcements of Elia?" Vilan waved his right fist in the air. "You can even continue to march towards Elia and try to take down this Greek city. This way, the safety of Poseidonia will be more guaranteed. The warriors of Caltini will agree to this request of yours." Quinduink immediately agreed. He was very excited to be able to plunder the Greek. He immediately got up and left with Torlek. When only the leaders of the Hilpini tribe were left in the tent, Jern complained loudly, "Father, it wasn't easy for us to gather our army and prepare to launch an all-out attack on Potentia. But now, not only did you agree to let Torlek leave, you even asked Quinduink to help. With so many warriors leaving, When will we be able to take down Potentia? His words were echoed by some of the leaders. Jern, if the great leader doesn't let Torlek leave, he won't leave. Don't forget that there are still 3,000 Pentni warriors in Poseidonia. Torlek is the great leader of the Pentni, not the leader of Hilpini. How can the great leader stop him? If we forcefully stop him, it will only cause our two tribes to quarrel, which is not good for the whole war. So the great leader has no choice but to do this. The leader of Benventum, Leskok, defended Vilan. Jern snorted, but he was still a little unwilling. Vilan smiled and nodded to Leskok to express his gratitude. This leader of Benventum was favored by many tribe leaders and was considered the best candidate to be the next great leader. Vilan explained, if it wasn't for the fact that the Legio III of Dionia came too quickly, and the Pentni warriors in Poseidonia didn't have time to repair the city's defenses, Torlek wouldn't have panicked so much. That's why I asked Quinduink to bring the Kaltini warriors with him. The total number of reinforcements will add up to 25,000, enough to crush the Legio III of Dionia, so that these Dionia people won't continue to cause trouble for us. As Vilan spoke, he looked around at the leaders in the tent and said, they're fighting in Poseidonia, so we can't just sit back and do nothing. Didn't the people of Syracuse say that Potentia's terrain is high and the mountain roads are inclined, so the ballistae won't be easy to set up and aim? We should take this opportunity to build a platform to set up the ballistae according to what the people of Syracuse said, and at the same time, continue to expand the camp and tighten the siege on Potentia. Got it, Jern replied weakly. Vilan glanced at him and smiled. Not attacking Potentia now is actually beneficial to us. This sentence successfully aroused the doubts of everyone, including his son. A few days ago, when the people of Syracuse delivered the rations, they told us that Dionysius's army will launch an attack on Greece in a few days. If that's the case, we should slow down the attack and let Potentia City be safe for the time being. Do you think the people of Dionia will choose to face the army of Syracuse on a flat beach? Or will they risk the danger of having their territory empty and send reinforcements all the way to Potentia to deal with us, who won't be a threat to Dionia for the time being? Of course they'll turn their main force to face the people of Syracuse, because they're a bigger threat, Leskok said loudly. At this moment, Jern also understood and said excitedly, if that's the case, we don't have to worry about the reinforcements of Dionia, and we can steadily take over Potentia and even Lucania. Seeing that the atmosphere in the tent had become lively, Vilan seized the opportunity and said, so we have to tighten our belts and not let anyone in Potentia escape, because they are our wealth. Ever since the people of Potentia retreated into the city, the Samanai people did not launch an attack on Potentia. However, this did not make the people in the city feel relieved. Anyone who saw the Samanai camp that was continuously being built at the foot of the hill, the endless military tents that stretched to the west from the top of the hill, and the countless bonfires that were lit at night like the stars in the sky, could not help but feel a chill in their hearts. Not to mention the trench that was constantly deepening and lengthening, and the antlers erected in front of the trench. The Samanai people wanted to catch them all in one fell swoop. The enemy was so powerful, but there was no news of the reinforcements during this period. The city of Potentia was like an isolated island isolated from the world. Panic and uneasiness were gradually devouring the courage of the people who were united against the common enemy. Plomoth forced himself to be calm to boost the confidence of the people, but he woke up with nightmares every night. In less than a month, he had actually lost more than 10 kilograms. Last night, he was even more unable to sleep, because the Samanai people had a new kind of siege equipment that could shoot helmet-sized stones from 100 meters away like arrows. The stones crossed the city wall and destroyed several wooden houses. Plomoth still remembered the panic in the eyes of every soldier around him. It was so clear that even he had doubts about whether he could defend the city. At this time, he did not have the appetite to drink the meat soup served by the servants. He just took a few bites of the coarse wheat cake and forced himself to be energetic, ready to continue his daily work, patrolling the city. Chapter 4:15. Brother, you're back? Plomet accidentally dropped his helmet on the ground. He did not care and asked excitedly, "Where is he?" "Big brother, I'm back." With a loud shout, Borat's sturdy figure appeared in the hall. Plomet hurried forward and grabbed him tightly with both hands. "Brother, you're back. That's great, you're back." Plomet's excited voice was choked with sobs. He had never missed his warlike brother as much as he did today. Yes, Plomet was good at balancing the interests of the tribes and governing the town. But when it came to marching, fighting, and boosting morale, it was his brother who loved to cause trouble since young. More importantly, did Turiai send reinforcements? He asked anxiously. "They're here. They're led by Sir Devers himself. They're the two strongest armies in Dionia, with a total of 20,000 men." Borat said excitedly. "That's great. They're finally here. God Asanu bless us." Plomet covered his chest with his hands as if a burden had been lifted from his shoulders. His pale face regained its vigor. "Where are they now?" They didn't come directly to Potentia. Instead, they went to Picassus and are preparing to attack Poseidonia. Borat saw his brother so happy and subconsciously lowered his voice. "Attack Poseidonia?" The smile on Plomet's face froze. What followed was anger. "Our city of Potentia is about to be breached by the Samani. That Devers actually brought reinforcements to a small coastal town 100 miles away that we don't even care about. What evil intentions does he have? Does he want to see us destroyed and then come to take advantage of us?" It was rare for Borat to see his calm and gentle brother so angry. But he was not in the mood to laugh at him. "Big brother, listen to me. Listen to me. Sir Devers attacked Poseidonia to end the siege of Potentia by the Samani, or even defeat them." Plomet, who was preparing to throw a wooden chair in the hall, heard his brother's shout. He dropped the chair with a clang and asked suspiciously, "Is that so?" "Yes." Borat did not avoid his gaze and said solemnly, "After I received your urgent letter, I wanted to return to Potentia from Turiai immediately, but Sir Devers sent people to stop me. He wanted to personally lead the troops and needed a guide who understood Potentia and the Samani to provide him with useful advice. So I left with the Dionia reinforcements. After Picassus finalized the Dionysian army's plan to repel the Samani, Sir Devers asked me to return to Potentia as soon as possible to cooperate with him in future military operations. He wanted to send a team to escort me back, but I refused. This is where I played since I was young. Every hillside, every path, every cave, and every boulder is familiar to me. No matter how tight the Samani's blockade is, I can still sneak in. If I bring them along, it will be dangerous." Listening to Borat, especially after learning about the Devers plan, Plomet gradually calmed down. "So, the Dionia has already begun to march towards Poseidonia. What we need to do now is to pay close attention to the Samani's movements at the foot of the mountain, yes?" Borat nodded again. Plomet exhaled and relaxed his entire body. "Second brother, since you're back, I'll leave the important task of leading the Potentia warriors to fight against the Samani to you." Borat shook his head. "Not now, big brother." "Why?" Plomet was a little puzzled. "Because that would cause too much of a commotion. If the Samani knew that I've returned from Turiai, they might guess that Dionia's reinforcements might have arrived. Then, Sir Devers' plan might fail. I even suggest that you hide the news of my return for the time being." Plomet thought for a while and could not help but say, "Second brother, you're right. I didn't expect that after a trip to Turiai, you've become more meticulous in your considerations." Borat was a little embarrassed. "This is all thanks to Sir Devers's reminder." "Sir Devers." Plomet only then realized that Borat's tone was strange. "I remember that you didn't call him that before," Plomet said slowly. Borat recalled the past few days of action with the Legion of Dionysia and the many times he met and talked with the Devers. He replied seriously, "He's really an amazing person." Cypros was still hoping that after a day of rapid march, the people of Syracuse would rest and reorganize the next day, so that Trine, Crotone, and Silatina could have some buffer time so that they could defend the north bank of the Ramato River. But the Greeks had underestimated Dionysius's determination. When he went all out, his actions and wisdom were terrifying. Back then, Himilco, the commander of Carthage, led the army to defeat the army of Syracuse. If not for the support of the people of Sparta, Dionysius would have been ousted from his throne by the angry people. And it was at this critical moment that Dionysius developed his strategy to the extreme. He took advantage of the fact that the people of Carthage were troubled by the plague and led the army out of the city at night. He attacked by land and sea, creating a diversion and hiding his main force, causing the experienced Himilco to misjudge and suffer a crushing defeat. This time, in order to conquer Greece, Dionysius had built an extremely large army and a huge amount of resources. In order to rope in some forces to cause trouble for Dionia, Syracuse had paid a great price. Therefore, if the expedition this time failed, Dionysius's rule in Syracuse would also be shaken. Therefore, since he set off from Sicily, he had been tense these days. Although he seemed dismissive of Dionia on the surface, that was to give the soldiers confidence, there had always been a deep fear in his heart. Therefore, he certainly understood the importance of time to the army of Syracuse. Before the march yesterday, he had asked Lochley to urgently inform the Hibernians in advance and build a rough camp in advance. So when the army arrived, although it was still chaotic, it was much more orderly than when they landed in Lochley. At least most of the soldiers were guaranteed sleep. Therefore, early the next morning, Dionysius began to assemble the troop. Although the soldiers complained, under his authority, they had no choice but to break camp and go north. At the same time, he ordered the fleet of Syracuse to sail north from the port of Hiernion and sail into the Ramato River. By noon, the large, disorderly army had reached the middle of the Ramato River, where it joined its tributary, the Coerta River. Trine had spies monitoring Hiernion day and night, and Hiernion also had spies monitoring the north bank of the Ramato River. Therefore, Dionysius knew that a large section of the Coerta River could be crossed, and there were not many defending troops on the other side of the river. Therefore, the army turned south and went straight to the middle of the Coerta River. The scouts on the other side of the river quickly reported back. When the chief general of Trine, Cypros, learned of Syracuse's movements, he secretly complained. As the commander of nearly 7,000 Trine soldiers in the city, he was anxious, but he did not dare to act rashly. Because the sentinel at the port had also sent an urgent report, countless Syracuse warships had appeared in the bay where Trine was located, and many soldiers could be seen on the ships. Cypros was worried that they would land on the northern coast of Trine, so he had to be on high alert at all times, and did not dare to rashly send troops to help Sirius. After Sirius received the urgent report from the Trine people and the guards on the shore last night, they hurriedly increased the number of troops on the north bank of the Coerta River to 12,000 this morning. However, they did not expect the army of Syracuse to arrive as soon as they set up camp. Sirius's chief general, Asyges, saw the appearance of Syracuse's soldiers on the other side of the river, and their numbers were increasing. He could not help but feel a chill in his heart. He could not help but curse, "Why haven't Crotone's reinforcements arrived yet?" His troops were too weak to be spread out on this long stretch of river that could be crossed. And the Crotone that he was cursing had also realized the seriousness of the situation after receiving a request for help from the Trine messenger, Starry Night. Late at night, they sent soldiers to inform all citizens of suitable age. Early this morning, there were citizens reporting to the square one after another. By noon, there were already 14,000 people gathered at the square, and more people were arriving, but Asyges and the generals could not wait any longer, so they let Astymas lead this part of the army first, and the rest of the militia and supplies would arrive later. Just as Asyges was cursing the Crotone people, Crotone's troops were anxiously rushing towards Sirius. But Dionysius obviously did not plan to give the southern Italian coalition any time to rest. Under his urging, the Syracuse army quickly rushed to the south bank of the Coerta River and started to get into formation. While the army was getting into formation, some of the Syracuse warships sailed into the Ramato River. Chapter 4:16. In the bay, there were warships preparing to land, and in the river, there were warships going against the current. Cypros was in a dilemma. He could only hate the fact that Ziliating was a small city with too few citizen soldiers, so he couldn't care less if he wanted to. But in the end, he made a decision. He sent 2,000 men to track the enemy ships on the north bank and prevent them from landing. But when the troops reached the confluence of the two rivers, they had no choice but to take a detour. The Ramato River flowed from north to south and was in their way. They could not cross the river, so they could only detour to the north. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Syracuse's warships approached the east bank of the Coerta River, which flowed into the Ramato River from the south. In fact, the sailors were exhausted from paddling all the time, so the soldiers on the ships hurried ashore. Dionysius was already dissatisfied with the army's lack of formation after nearly an hour. The main reason was that reinforcements kept arriving. He immediately gave the order, "Don't wait, attack." The exhausted Syracuse soldiers stepped into the cold Coerta River and charged towards the Silitinian defensive line on the other side. Although the Silitinians were few in number and their defensive line was thin, they had an absolute advantage in terms of stamina. For a moment, the Syracuse army was stuck in the river and could not advance. On this 4-mile stretch of river, the Silitinians fought with their lives to protect their homeland. They fought with the Syracuse army, which outnumbered them 4-1, for more than half an hour. The entire river was dyed red. It was only when the Syracuse soldiers arrived from the west and attacked the flank of the Silitinian formation that the morale of the Silitinians began to waver, and they finally collapsed. Dionysius heaved a sigh of relief. He had finally led his army to break through the southern Italian defensive line and entered the flat and wide Euphemia plains, but at this time, the Syracuse soldiers were exhausted and had no strength to pursue the defeated army. After occupying the temporary camp abandoned by the Silitinians, Dionysius ordered his army to rest and reorganize. The assists who were about to reach Trina received news that Syracuse's army had crossed the Coerta River. The shocked assists immediately led his troops back and sent someone to explain the reason to Trine. It was only in the afternoon that Crotone's reinforcements arrived at the west courtyard. Not only did the chief general of Siloton, Parthenis, and the upper echelons of the council not welcome the arrival of the army of the former mother state and alliance leader, but they blamed them for their late arrival, allowing the people of Syracuse to occupy the northern bank of the Coerta River and putting the city of Siloton in danger. Ascamas and the other Crotone generals did not defend themselves in the face of the accusations, because the situation had indeed reached a dangerous stage. In the evening, the winged cavalry from the north broke the silence of the Dionia barrack. Epithenes and Dracos received an urgent message from the messenger and hurried to the main tent. "Commanders, I have just received an urgent report from Siloton. The people of Syracuse have broken through the defensive line of the Coerta River and entered Siloton territory," Felicius said with a serious expression. "I have already said that the army of the Southern Alliance is unreliable." Epithenes spat on the ground angrily. "We have won this battle for nothing. How many people from the Syracuse army are in Siloton?" Dracos asked anxiously. "According to the letter from Siloton, more than 50,000. Felicius picked up the letter on the table. Dracos snatched it and opened it to read. One had to know that he was illiterate when he became the leader of the mercenary army. In the past few years, In order to be able to lead the army and understand the military law and military orders, he had specially attended the adult study class in Tulii school. He had studied very hard and improved very quickly. Reading letters was no longer a problem. More than 50,000 people, Epiphanes exclaimed and immediately thought of something. This means that the focus of Syracuse's attack is on the west coast. The army here is only there to restrain us. That seems to be the case. Felicius nodded calmly. He was a little depressed that he could not figure out Dionysius's intentions in time. In the letter, the people of Siloton asked us to retreat to Siloton immediately and join forces with them to fight against the army of Syracuse. Dracos looked at the two of them. In fact, Lord Ansitanos also wrote a letter suggesting that we retreat to Siloton. Felicius took out another letter. Other than retreating to Siloton, do we have any other choice? Epiphanes shrugged. If we continue to defend here and allow the people of Syracuse to defeat the armies of the other allied city-states on the Euphemia plains, and then allow them to take over Siloton city, our 20,000 people will really be fish in a net. Felicius sighed. But if we do that, Kyrenia will be in trouble. In order to let the people of Dionia defend with peace of mind, the people of Kyrenia provided them with abundant food every day. After repelling the enemy's attack during the day, the people of Kyrenia, including the council and civilians, came out of the city to express their gratitude. They even held a banquet for the commander of the Legion of Dionysia, and sent wine to the soldiers, and so on. Felicius declined the kindness of the people of Dionia, but every soldier of Dionia felt Kyrenia's gratitude and hospitality. The three of them were silent for a while. Dracos said helplessly, "There's nothing we can do under such circumstances. We can only hope that Hades will protect us and let Kyrenia defend its homeland. When we gather our forces and repel the people of Syracuse, Kyrenia's siege will naturally be lifted." Repel? Epiphanes caught on to what Dracos said and asked, "Do you think we can repel Dionysius's army in the Euphemia plain?" "Why not?" Dracos pointed at the letter and asked. According to the letter, Syracuse only has around 50,000 people there, and our two legions together with the troops of Crotone, Silatina, and Trine probably have around 50,000 people. Do you not have confidence in our legion? You should know that the soldiers of Dionia are the best soldiers in the Mediterranean Sea. Dracos glared at Epiphanes angrily. "Who said I don't have confidence in our legion? Don't slander us." Epiphanes was furious when he heard that. If word of this got out, how could he lead his legion in the future? "All right, stop it, both of you," Felicius yelled. "Look at the situation now, and you're still in the mood to argue? If Lord Devers knew what you're doing now, he'd regret making you two commanders." At the mention of the Devers, Epiphanes and Dracos quietened down. "I'll pretend I didn't hear what you said just now. Forget it too. I don't want to hear any rumors about this among the soldiers, understand?" Felicius looked straight at the two. Epiphanes pursed his lips at Dracos, and Dracos nodded reluctantly. Felicius secretly heaved a sigh of relief. "All right, let's discuss how we're going to retreat tomorrow morning." That morning, the Samni leader stationed in Poseidonia, Piccini, who had been worrying the whole night, did not expect a miracle. The Dionia army still appeared outside the city. They were divided into two groups. One was building a camp, and the other was in formation outside the city. "You want to take my Poseidonia with just 4,000 men?" Piccini felt humiliated. At that moment, he saw something pushed to the front of the enemy's formation by the soldiers. His eyes widened in shock, and he could not help but hold the battlements with both hands and lean forward, trying to get a better look. Then, he saw 7 or 8 small black dots fly up from the enemy's formation and hit the city wall. Bang! 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 The loud noise dispelled Piccini's hope. The people of Dionia also masturbated. For the rest of the time, the Samni people stared at the stone bullets flying in the air, afraid that they would hit them. The already broken city wall, which had only undergone simple repairs, became even more dilapidated after the continuous bombardment of the cannons. Piccini only hoped that reinforcements would arrive as soon as possible. The day passed in the bustle of the Dionia soldiers and the unease of the Samni defenders. The next morning, the bugle of the Dionia camp was blown. The soldiers who woke up in the tents did not care about their sleepiness and sat up. They urged each other to quickly put on their armor. Report, Commander. A large number of enemies have appeared in the north of the camp. It is estimated that there are more than 20,000 of them, and they are advancing towards the camp. Scout Captain Kriglew reported to Alexis. More than 20,000 people. Alexis was not surprised, but rather happy. With the help of the guards, he dressed neatly and walked 2 steps in high spirits. He said loudly, "It seems that the Samni people are very ambitious. They want to eat us in one bite. Haha, we still don't know who will eat who in the end." He was about to leave the tent when the tent was opened. The first captain, Lazaru, came in and shouted excitedly, "Commander, the enemies have taken the bait, and there are more than 20,000 of them. This should be enough for you," Alexis said jokingly. Lazaru chuckled. Previously, because Alexis took the initiative to retreat from the Samni army in Potentia, he was not very satisfied and had been sulking. Now that he was no longer angry, he only had a strong desire to fight. "Don't be anxious. Let the brothers eat their fill. Today's battle may last longer, because Sir Devers's order to the 3rd Legion is to stick to the enemy and tire them out, so that they can put all their forces into attacking our camp," Alexis reminded again. Chapter 4:17. At that moment, Torek was looking at the Dionia camp in the distance. In fact, the Samnese reinforcements had already arrived last night. They had planned to attack at night, but they found that the Dionia had already built a camp and it was heavily guarded. Torek was also a seasoned leader. He knew that in the dark, especially when there was no moonlight, an attack of tens of thousands of people could easily go out of control and cause unnecessary losses. Therefore, he restrained his impulse and delayed the attack until the next day. As a result, the Samnese reinforcements spent the night in the mountains. It was already early November, and the weather in the mountains was getting colder. Even though the soldiers were wrapped in leather robes to sleep, they still felt cold. Torek rubbed his slightly frozen hands. He did not expect the Dionia to build a seemingly large camp so quickly. But then he thought, it's better this way. The Dionia probably won't be able to escape. He looked at the chief commander of Caltini's army and said in a negotiating tone, "Chief Quinduk, my people will attack from the north and east, and your people will attack from the west. What do you think?" "I have no objections." Quinduk nodded and then asked, "What about the south of the enemy camp? Don't let them run away." "The south." Torek pointed at the distant city of Poseidonia and said confidently, "They can't run away." Quinduk understood and said excitedly, "It seems that the Dionia have become prey that has fallen into the trap. It's just the right time for the warriors to vent their anger after not sleeping well last night," Quinduk said as he rubbed his slightly cold body with his hands. Torek looked around at the densely packed warriors behind him who were eager to fight and ordered, "Blow the horn." The long and powerful sound of the horn pierced through the morning mist and reached Poseidonia, which was 2 miles away. Piccini and Mobk, who were standing on the city wall and looking up, heard it. They were instantly shocked. "Did you hear that?" Piccini shouted. "It's our horn. Our reinforcements have arrived." The Samnese warriors on the city wall shouted excitedly. "Warriors? Get ready to go out of the city to provide support at any time, and eliminate those hateful Dionians." Piccini's dejection from yesterday was swept away, and he shouted in high spirits. "Roar! Roar!" The soldiers roared in unison. Alexis observed the slowly approaching enemy from the watchtower. She said calmly, "The enemy is preparing to attack. Tell all the squads to get ready." I'll go now. The adjutant turned around and went downstairs. The rest is up to you guys, Alexis said expectantly to the ballista observer, Steponian, who was also on the tower. Since the observer was from Dionysia Academy, Alexis' attitude was quite polite. Don't worry, Lord Commander, Steponian replied confidently, but his heart was pounding. Because of the morning fog, he could not clearly see the markings made outside the camp yesterday, so he could only rely on his eyes to judge. Torek led the attack on the north side of the camp. Due to the lack of time, when the troops rushed to the rescue, they did not bring the Syracuse ballista, nor did they have any large siege equipment. They only made a few dozen ladders at the last minute before resting last night. But Tony believed that it was enough. This was because the scouts reported that there were no other defensive facilities outside the Dionia camp except for the trenches. Therefore, the huge reinforcements only needed to break through the not-so-tall mud wall of the camp, and the Dionia could only wait for their deaths inside. When the attacking troops were about 250 meters away from the camp, Torek swung his spear forward. Attack! More than 10 trumpeters blew their horns at the same time. Woo! 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 The sound echoed throughout the battlefield. Some of the Samanese warriors carried the ladders, some raised their shields, and some only held javelins and spears. They began to move faster, elevation 40, full string, small projectiles. Steponian shouted from the watchtower. Prepare the ballista. The ballista captain ordered. Elevation 40, full string, small projectiles. Under the soldiers' quick control, the ballista let out a creaking sound. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Stone projectiles were ejected with a strong gust of wind. The ballista captain looked at the stone projectiles flying towards the enemy. He was excited, but also a little regretful. The ballista had bombarded the city of Poseidonia for a long time yesterday, causing some of the ballistas to be damaged. Otherwise, they would have killed more enemies. Torek saw a shadow flying over his head and thought, not good. However, he was not as surprised as General Diapantos. After all, in the hearts of the Samanese, the Greeks were all highly skilled. If Syracuse could make ballistas, then so could Dionia. The ballista did not scare Torek. Instead, it stimulated his ferocity. He waved his short sword again and shouted, "Charge! Kill all the Greeks!" The warriors around him roared, and the roar quickly spread to the entire army. The screams caused by the falling stone projectiles were completely drowned out. The Samanese morale was high. They took large strides towards the Dionia camp. 100 meters. A shout came from the watchtower. "Archers, get ready!" Ibalu, the light infantry captain, shouted. The archers had been waiting behind the mud wall for a long time. They spread out in a fan shape and pulled their bows. Hundreds of arrows rained down on the Samanese attacking formation. The screams caused by the stone projectiles were no longer the few screams caused by the stone projectiles. The weak defense of the Samanese brought a lot of results to the light infantry of Dionia. However, the screams did not slow down the Samanese advance. After only 2 rounds of arrows, the Samanese had already rushed within 50 meters. The soldiers of Dionia Legio III could clearly hear the rumbling footsteps of the enemy and feel the slight tremors caused by the countless footsteps. Even their shouts shrouded the entire camp. Although the soldiers were a little nervous, they did not panic. This was because they were Dionia Legio III. They had made many military achievements for Dionia. They participated in the Second Crotone War and took down the city of Asplustum alone. They had raided the city of Grimentum. They had quelled the rebellion of Lucania with a legion, annihilated the forces of Sinsing, and captured the city of Picassus. The dazzling stars on the flag of Legio III symbolized their honor. Today's battle would definitely increase the honor of the Third Legion. The company captain, Hitanot, was once a Greek slave in Nudum. After Dionia captured Nudum, he gained his freedom and chose to settle in Nudum. He eventually joined the Dionia Legio III and became a mid-level officer who commanded 200 people through his own efforts. The hatred of the past had dissipated. Now, he was fighting side by side with the Lucanian soldiers who he once hated but were now like brothers for their homeland, the Dionia Alliance. "Javelins!" he shouted. The well-prepared soldiers standing on the mud wall threw the javelins in their hands with all their might. The Samnites who rushed to the camp's trench also threw javelins. For a moment, countless javelins crisscrossed in the air. As both sides had fought before, they already understood each other's tactics and raised their shields to protect themselves. Compared to the densely packed and poorly equipped Samnite warriors outside the camp, the Dionia soldiers were on high ground and had the protection of mud walls and shields. Their casualties were not high, but from time to time javelins would hit the shields. It was very inconvenient to use them, but at the moment there was no time to cut them off. Although the Samnites suffered more casualties, the rain of javelins continued. With its suppression, the Samnite warriors rushed to the trench and jumped directly into the trench. Some set up long ladders, while a few people set up human walls and began to climb up with all their might. The Dionia soldiers threw javelins into the trench. At such a close distance, almost every shot was accurate. But even so, they could not stop the Samnites from attacking. "Pour oil! Quick, pour oil!" Stheniot shouted anxiously as he bent down to grab the tung oil tank that had been prepared in advance and placed behind the wall. Then, he heard a scream. A soldier behind him was pierced in the left shoulder by a javelin and fell to the ground in pain. Stheniot crouched down vigilantly and peeked out from behind the mud wall. He happened to see a Samnite javelin thrower less than 5 meters away from him holding a javelin. The javelin was about to throw, but it was shot down by the marksman on the sentry tower of the camp. Stheniot quickly stood up and smashed the oil tank down. It hit the head of a Samnite warrior in the trench. The oil tank broke and oil spilled everywhere. Quite a number of soldiers on the mud wall did the same thing as Hidenot. They threw their torches into the trench, and a wall of fire instantly rose in the trench. Countless men on fire howled in the trench until there was no sound. "Commander, the enemy in the north has temporarily retreated. According to preliminary statistics, we have 240 casualties." The adjutant rushed to report. "We have lost so many brothers before the battle even started." Although there were more Samnites moaning on the ground and burning in the trench outside the camp, Alexis still frowned. She was also a little afraid of the lethality of the Samnite javelins. He pointed to the south of the camp and said, "Look, the enemy in Poseidonia has also come out. The battle has just begun. It's a pity that we brought too few oil tanks. Otherwise, if they were used in several directions at the same time, the Samnites would have suffered great losses." The adjutant said regretfully. Chapter 4:18. Because the Samnite attacking from the north had the largest number, Alexis had concentrated most of the cannons and light infantry on this side. When Tolek led his troops to retreat temporarily, the 7,000 Kautini warriors in the south, under the leadership of Quinduk, had already started to climb the mud wall. The 1st and 2nd Brigades were responsible for the defense on this side. Even Lazaru, who loved to fight, could not help but feel numb when he saw the dense crowd of people below the mud wall and in the trenches. "Don't panic, stab again. No matter how many enemies there are, they can't come up." Lazaru held his shield and spear and walked back and forth behind the soldiers. As he observed the enemy, he also loudly encouraged them. "Be careful, Captain!" the guard behind him suddenly exclaimed. From the corner of his eyes, Lazaru saw a black figure ignore the stabbing of the soldiers and jump down from the top of the long ladder, straight towards him. It happened so suddenly that he did not even have time to swing his spear. Instead, he quickly threw away his shield and spear. Just as he pulled out the short sword at his waist, he was pushed to the ground. Pressed under the enemy, their limbs entangled. In this narrow distance, he struggled to push the short sword in his hand forward, but it actually hit a hard object and could not stab into the chest. At this time, the black figure's strong hands had already pressed hard on his eyes. He could only feel his eyes swelling in pain. At this moment of life and death, Lazaru did not panic. He turned his right wrist upwards, and the short sword stuck against the hard object and stabbed upwards. The black figure groaned and fell backwards. The short sword had pierced through his lower jaw. Lazaru pushed him away forcefully and immediately stood up. The soldiers that rushed over used their spears to stab the struggling enemy. Lazaru shook his slightly dizzy head and gently rubbed his swollen and painful eyes. He squinted and saw that the person was wearing silver armor, and there were also silver greaves on his legs. As far as Lazaru knew, there were about 4 types of samurai warriors: light infantry who held spears and bayonets without any protection, light infantry who only held spears, shields, and javelins and wore helmets without armor, medium infantry who held shields, spears, and helmets with golden breastplates, and heavy infantry who wore helmets with colorful feather crowns and wore silver armor with shins. However, there were not many of these heavy infantry among the samurai people, and their status in the tribe was not low. Lazaru looked carefully at the dead body on the ground. He bent down to pick up his short sword and waved it with all his might to get rid of the blood stains on the sword. Now, when he recalled the scene just now, he felt a little scared. If he was still wearing his previous equipment and was still using the curved military knife, that was a type of curved sword that was more suitable for slashing, it would have been very difficult for him to swing it and slash the enemy's neck in a dangerous situation of close combat. Instead, his eyes would have been blinded by the enemy's hands. Lazaru held the sword in his right hand and the shield in his left. He stood there and watched. At this time, most of the soldiers standing behind the wall had stopped stabbing down. Because the enemy kept climbing up the wall, most of them raised their shields and pushed outwards to block the stabbing spears. At the same time, they knocked the enemy into the trench. Once the enemy lost his balance, the spears and short swords would stab through the gaps between the shields. Behind the soldiers fighting with all their might, there were also soldiers on the second line. They were ready to fill in at any time, and at the same time, they had to surround and kill the enemies that suddenly broke in. The samurai people had always been plundering in the Campanian lands and rarely attacked fortified cities. In fact, they lacked experience in sieging cities. So, Talik, who had never led so many soldiers before, was full of ambition and wanted to destroy the encampment that was already surrounded. He did not expect that this small encampment would cause his army to stumble. Just that wall of fire alone had cost the lives of hundreds of Pentni warriors. So, he was filled with resentment and anger. He retreated to regroup the encampment. When the fire weakened, he blew the horn to attack again. The samurai warriors charged in front with the anger of revenge, while the light infantry followed behind them naked. They all took off their shirts and wrapped them with a handful of soil. They held a javelin in one hand and a bag of soil in the other, ready to rescue their people who were on fire at any time. When the samurai attacking the north side of the encampment braved the continuous attacks of stone bullets, arrows, and javelins, they jumped into the trench again. They set up long ladders, stepped on the corpses of their people, and continued to climb up. The defending Dionia soldiers did not throw any more oil cans. Under the protection of the guards, Talik, who was anxiously urging his people to attack, almost tripped over the bag of soil that the light infantry had placed in front of the trench. He had an idea and shouted, "Throw the bag of soil down! Throw the bag of soil down!" Under the leadership of their leader, the light infantry who were throwing javelins into the encampment quickly concentrated on throwing the bag of soil into the trench. Soon, a few passages were filled in the trench. Seeing this, the samurai people became even more excited. They continued to add the bag of soil, trying to build it to the same height as the top of the wall. The Dionia soldiers also kept stabbing the bag of soil with their spears, trying to destroy the enemy's plan. The samurai warriors continuously surged up from the slope, built by the bag of soil, trying to occupy the top of the wall. The shields of both sides collided, and the spears exchanged blows. A fierce close combat began. "Commander, General Lartines, General Elia, is asking for help." The adjutant rushed to the north side of the encampment and reported to Alexis, who was nervously watching the battle. "They can't hold on any longer." Alexis frowned. She had ordered the Elia troops and half of the heavy infantry brigade, about 2,000 people, to defend the south side of the encampment. There should not be too many Samanai people coming out of the city of Poseidonia, so their defense should not be too tight. The Elia people don't understand the Samanai's tactic. Many of them were hit by the javelins, and they seemed to be frightened by the Samanai's momentum. The adjutant explained. "The Allied army is really—" Alexis stopped halfway and swallowed the word, unreliable, back into her stomach. She could not say anything that would break the unity at this time. "Light Armor Brigade, send 400 people to support the southern encampment." The military law of Dionia emphasized in the operational principles that the commander of the troops should, if possible, keep as many reserves as possible in case of emergency. Therefore, Alexis used the Light Armor Brigade as a reserve. At this time, it was time to use them. Just as he finished speaking, he heard a loud crashing sound and screams in front of him. "The wall is collapsing!" Alexis was shocked. She saw that the northern wall and the slope built by the enemy's bag of soil, because of the intense fighting and trampling of the soldiers from both sides, could not bear the burden and collapsed, causing a cloud of dust to rise. When the dust dissipated, there was a gap about 4 people wide in the mud wall. The Samanai people were rushing in through the gap, and the soldiers were desperately trying to block them. The battle had finally reached the most critical moment. "Edgard, send a company to support the southern encampment." The other light armor companies immediately pushed the enemy back. Alexis pointed at the place where the fierce battle was going on, and with a serious expression, he gave the order to the Light Armor Brigade leader. "Brothers, it's finally our turn." Edgard turned around and shouted excitedly to the Light Armor Brigade. "Roar!" The Light Armor Brigade, full of fighting spirit, roared in unison. This roar made Alexis's nervousness slightly dissipate. He solemnly said to the adjutant, "You take 200 Light Armor Brigade and quickly support the southern encampment. I don't have any reserves here, so you have to defend the southern wall no matter what. Lartines doesn't know how to command, so you will do it." "Understood, Commander." The adjutant solemnly saluted, turned around, and left. At this moment, Alexis began to anxiously look forward to the arrival of the Devers' reinforcements as soon as possible. In fact, on a small hill a mile east of the Dionia Legio III encampment, the Devers, Tormid, and a group of guards were overlooking the battlefield. Nearly 30,000 Samanai warriors surrounded the center from the east, west, south, and north. The small encampment was like a broken boat, in danger of being swallowed by the huge waves at any time. Tormid could not help but sigh. Legio III is fighting very tenaciously, to be able to hold on for so long. "Yes, it's not easy." The Devers nodded approvingly, then he asked in a serious tone, "But they are not fighting alone. Have all the troops reached their predetermined positions?" "Yes, Lord Supreme Commander." The herald, Tormid, finished saluting and reported excitedly, "The First Legion has reached the northeast of the encampment, about 1.5 miles away. The Second Legion has reached the southeast of the encampment, more than 1 mile away. Led's cavalry has blocked the road to the northern mountains. Izum's reconnaissance team and Lau's army are rushing to the city of Poseidonia, ready to cut off the enemy's attempt to escape back to the city." In fact, standing on this small hill, one could roughly see the movements of the various troops. They did not blow their bronze horns, nor did they shout. Instead, they quietly and quickly stretched their formation horizontally, in an attempt to surround the enemy outside the encampment, while at the same time advancing towards the encampment. "Since everything has been arranged, then let us wait for the good news of victory," the Devers said with a relaxed face, then sat on the rock leisurely, ready to watch the battle. Chapter 419. The people of Dionia are here. The reinforcements of Dionia are here. The archers on the sentry tower were shouting the same thing as the wounded Samanese soldiers, but they were shouting in joy, "Our reinforcements are here! Our reinforcements are here! They're finally here!" Alexis heaved a sigh of relief when she heard the news. The soldiers' morale was greatly boosted when they heard the shout. Their weary bodies seemed to be filled with energy again. They roared in unison, trying their best to drive the enemy out of the camp. Torek, who heard the shout, was still unwilling to believe it. When he turned around and saw the army of Dionia rushing towards them, any stragglers would be swallowed up in an instant. His whole body seemed to be drained of energy. He staggered and fell to the ground. There was only one thought in his mind: it's over. We've fallen into the trap of the Dionia. The Samanese soldiers, who had been fighting for a long time, were equally exhausted when they saw the menacing soldiers of the Legion of Dionysia coming from behind. Although they panicked, most of the soldiers did not turn around to escape. Instead, they picked up their spears and turned around to resist the enemy's surprise attack. There was only one thought in their minds: fight. However, the continuous arrival of new reinforcements and the pincer attack from the front and back made the resistance of the Samanese soldiers futile. On the contrary, it affected them from escaping in time. As the Samanai people continued to fall, the remaining soldiers finally lost their fighting spirit and began to flee. Some of the soldiers were already exhausted, so they simply abandoned their weapons and surrendered. Thus, after a period of time, the battle was basically over. All that was left was to chase after the defeated soldiers. In the camp of Dionia, the soldiers of Legio III were either cleaning up the bodies of their comrades, receiving treatment from the medical camp, or leaning against the mud wall and lying on the ground to rest. Legion Commander Alexis was solemnly listening to the adjutant's report on the casualties of the Legion. According to the preliminary statistics of the medical camp, our Legion suffered 412 casualties, 251 were seriously injured, and 537 were lightly injured. A total of 1,200 casualties. 1,200 casualties. Alexis clenched her fists in shock. That's 15% of the main force of the Legion. This casualty is quite high. The adjutant saw the commander's pained expression and quickly comforted him. There's nothing we can do about it. We're facing the ferocious Samnai who outnumber us 3-1. Alexis sighed and said nothing. At this moment, the originally quiet camp suddenly boiled over. Alexis watched as the Devers entered the camp with the guards. As they walked towards the center, they chatted amiably with the soldiers they met. Alexis hurried over to greet him. Before he could even get close, Devers caught up to him and gave him a very strong hug. "Well done, Commander Alexis." This sentence made most of the sadness, grievance, and dissatisfaction in Alexis' heart dissipate. He saluted and answered, reporting to the Supreme Commander, "Legio III has completed its combat mission and is currently resting." "It's more than just completing the mission." Devers looked around at the soldiers who quickly crowded over. Their faces were covered with dust and blood stains and were full of exhaustion. He clenched his right fist and hammered heavily on his left chest. "Brothers of Legio III, you've defended your camp and fought hard against an enemy 3 times your size. You've made a great contribution to the final annihilation of the Samnai. You've saved Potentia. You've removed the danger of our Lucanian territory being invaded. You've changed the entire war situation of Dionia in the north. Not only do I want to thank you, but the entire people of Dionia want to thank you. You're the heroes of Dionia and will be remembered in the Temple of Hades in Turii. Victory to Legio III." Devers' passionate words reached the ears of every soldier. Whether they were Lucanians or Greeks, they were so excited that they shed tears. Victory to Legio III. Victory to Devers. Victory to Dionia. Continuous cheers resounded over the camp. When the captive Samnai warriors heard this voice, Their faces were filled with unspeakable pain and frustration. In this battle, Devers besieged the enemy's reinforcements and used Legio III as bait to attract 26,000 to 7,000 Samni warriors to besiege them. Taking advantage of the fatigue of the veterans, they secretly mobilized more than 2 legions to encircle and annihilate them. Tens of thousands of Samni warriors were captured, causing more than 7,000 casualties. Only nearly 3,000 people escaped into the mountains. At the same time, they easily recaptured the city of Poseidonia and obtained a large number of supplies that were piled up in the city and had yet to be transported to the Samni camp in Potentia. It could be said to be a complete victory. On this day, the army of Syracuse, which had broken through the north bank of the Ramato River, was still biding their time. They built a simple camp at the confluence of the Ramato River and the Corda River, and used dozens of fast boats to build a pontoon bridge across the Corda River, allowing the supplies from Hyhernion to be delivered smoothly to the camp of Syracuse. The soldiers could finally have a full meal. To the west of the camp of Syracuse, the Trine people who were close to the Tyrrhenian Sea were still in a state of panic. They sent out a large number of scouts to keep a close eye on the camp of Syracuse, and at the same time, sent messengers to Syracuse while maintaining contact with Canopetia. In Syracuse, even though the number of Crotone's troops had increased to 17,000, causing the strength of the Allied forces in Syracuse to skyrocket to 30,000 people, the people were still uneasy. Syracuse's main camp was less than 30 miles away from the city of Xyliting. A few hours of marching would be enough to reach the city. Now, all of the Xyliting citizens had abandoned their homes outside the city and brought their families with them to escape into Xyliting. With regards to Crotone's full support, the leaders of Syracuse, led by Pratines, could no longer blame them. However, with regards to the pressure of Syracuse's army, the allied forces of Crotone and Syracuse could do nothing about it. The only thing they could do was to send scouts to the south every once in a while to understand the movements of the Legion of Dionysia. On this day, the 4th and 5th Legions of Dionia began to break camp early in the morning. In order to prevent Syracuse from using this abandoned camp, they not only removed the tents, pulled down the wooden fences, but also bulldozed the earth rampart and filled in the trenches. The reason why they spent so much effort was to repay the kindness of the people of Syracuse and to make up for the guilt in their hearts. Last night, when Felicius informed the people of the news that the Dionysian army had to prepare to retreat, although they knew that the situation could not be reversed, Pratines and the others still did their best to retain the reinforcements that could protect Kyrenia's safety. Felicius could only bear to reject their request. However, when they were about to leave today, almost all the people of Kyrenia came out to see the Dionysian army off. Not only did they help the soldiers break camp, they also brought along freshly cooked bread, oatmeal, and water, hoping that the soldiers could have a full meal before they left. The deep friendship of Kyrenia and the heartbreaking words of persuasion moved many Dionia soldiers. Due to the military order, they had to go north, but the words of comfort to the people of Kyrenia were more or less the same. Don't worry. As long as you hold the city of Kyrenia, we will rendezvous with the other allied forces. Soon, we will defeat Syracuse's army, and then we will come to save you. Felicius said the same thing to Phreneres, but in an even more tactful manner. Phreneres did not seem to hear the uncertainty in Felicius' words. He said with determination, Kyrenia has been besieged by Rockley too many times. No one in Greece is better at defending cities than we are. We will hold the city until you return. I know that the people of Dionia keep their promises. Pratines' words made Felicius feel even more pressured. When it was almost dusk, the 4th and 5th legions finally arrived at Syracuse. At this time, the Syracuse and Rockley allied forces led by the Phasapeses surrounded Kyrenia. In the evening, in the headquarters of the Southern Alliance of Syracuse, Dionia's southern commander Felicius, Senate's envoy Ansitanos, Crotone's general Escamas, Syracuse's chief general Pratines, Syracuse's general Asexias, and Treen's envoy Asopias sat around a large wooden table. On the table was a map of the Euthymia plains. Asexias stood up with a wooden stick in his hand and explained the current situation to everyone present. My lords, according to our investigation, the army of Syracuse has set up camp at the confluence of the Romulo River and the Coerta River. Asexias pointed at the mark on the map with his stick. This is the edge of the Euthymia plains. If you go west, you will only be 15 miles away from Treen. To be precise, only Asopias emphasized loudly. Ahem. Lord Asopias naturally knows more about the situation in the west than we do, Asexias corrected him awkwardly. Syracuse's camp is far from Treen and the terrain is flat. However, they need to cross the Romulo River, which is impassable. This is not a small problem for the people of Syracuse. The navy of Syracuse has already occupied the Romulo River. It will be easy for them to send their army across the Romulo River. Asopias emphasized once again. Asexias was a little angry. Lord Asopias, if you like to interrupt others so much, why don't you explain it to everyone? Asopias shook his head. I'm just supplementing what you've said. Didn't you say that we, the Trinans, know more about the situation in the West than you do? It's better for us to come up with a more reasonable plan to deal with the situation on the battlefield if everyone here has a comprehensive and detailed understanding of the situation on the battlefield. This war is no longer a matter of Syracuse or Treen, but a crisis that the entire Southern Alliance must face together. Lord Asopias is right. Asexias, don't be hasty. Speak slowly and in more detail. Pertines quickly stepped in to smooth things over between the two.